20 years is a long time to wait for anything, and Oda has been dropping the name of this island since Little Garden, back when the Straw Hats were still a crew of 9, and the idea of giants ruling their own nation felt like a throwaway detail in a much smaller story. Elbaf was always the horizon line. Every giant character introduced since then, Dory, Bragi. The entire idea that these towering warriors answered to something bigger than themselves was quietly building toward this. So instead of the arc unfolding scene by scene the way the anime will eventually pace it out, this rundown is going to follow it a different way, as 3 collisions happening at once, on 3 different levels of the same tree, that don't realize they're about to slam into each other until they do. There's the Straw Hats stumbling blind through a nightmare built by one of their own allies. There's a royal family whose entire history is a cover story for something much darker. And there's an invasion force that was already inside the walls before anyone noticed the doors were unlocked. All 3 converge in the same place, and the fallout is the reason this arc doesn't feel like a detour anymore. It feels like the setup for the last stretch of the whole series. Start with where the crew actually was before any of this happened, because the arc opens mid-celebration rather than mid-crisis. The Straw Hats had just pulled off their escape from Egghead, and the giant warrior pirates, Dory and Bragi's crew, were aboard the Going Luffy Senpai, throwing what amounts to a victory party. Omo and Kashi, 2 of the giants who'd guarded Vegapunk's satellite Lilith's lab, catch everyone up on where things stand. Their captains, Dory and Bragi, were retrieved from Little Garden, but not in the state anyone expected. 100+ years of uninterrupted single combat had finally destroyed both of their weapons. Not damaged them, destroyed them completely, down to nothing. The 2 giants had been reduced to fighting bare-fisted, and the only reason they agreed to leave the island at all was to get new weapons made back home in Elbaf. The detail that lands hardest here, and the one Nami can't process, is that neither giant sees this as an ending. They fully intend to go back and keep swinging at each other once they're rearmed. 100 years of mutual combat isn't a grudge that gets resolved, it's a relationship that's worth sitting with for a second. Because it's going to recur as a theme once the arc reaches Elbaf proper, violence, for these giants, isn't always a symptom of something broken. Sometimes it's just how they love each other. Before jumping into what happens once the crew actually reaches the island, there's a detour worth covering, because it pays off directly later. A month prior, on Gartel Island, the red-haired pirates had just crushed the Bardo Club. Bartolomeo and his crew had made the catastrophic decision to raid Shanks' territory and burn his flag. And Shanks, in the kind of scene that reveals exactly why he's respected across the entire New World, sits Bartolomeo down and explains the actual stakes. His flag isn't decoration. Islands rely on the protection that flag represents, and if word spreads that disrespecting it goes unpunished, the people under that protection become targets. This isn't posturing. It's closer to a warlord explaining supply lines. Bartolomeo, who has spent the entire series as pure comic relief built around his obsessive devotion to Luffy, gets handed what looks like a death sentence, a vial of poison, supposedly agonizing, supposedly fatal, that he's ordered to deliver to Luffy within the month as payment for his crime. And Bartolomeo, without a flicker of hesitation, drinks it himself rather than risk his captain's idol. He's in tears, apologizing to Luffy in absentia for not living to see him become Pirate King. And then he just burps. It was never real poison. It was a loyalty test, and Bartolomeo passed it in the most Bartolomeo way conceivable, by trying to martyr himself over a threat to someone else entirely. Shanks is visibly moved by the display, but consequences still apply, because respect and forgiveness aren't the same thing in his worldview. Yasopp puts a shot clean through the fleeing Barto Club's ship from an impossible distance, sinking it. Fate of the crew, unconfirmed. It's a small aside in the grand scheme of the arc, but it's one of the clearest windows into how Shanks actually operates as an emperor, rather than just a legend. On the villain side of the map, Blackbeard's situation on Hachinosu is a mixed bag, that he treats less like a setback and more like a portfolio adjustment. He's furious that Avalo Pizarro let both Kobe and Gecko Moria slip away, but the wins outweigh the losses in his accounting. His crew captured Garp, arguably the single biggest prize available anywhere in the world right now, and picked up Charlotte Pudding, whose Mero adjacent three-eyed heritage makes her valuable in ways that haven't been fully explained yet. Through his network, Blackbeard checks in with Lafitte, who's watching the Revolutionary Army's siege on the Holy Land tighten. The detail worth flagging is oddly logistical. The bandalas, the mechanical transport system feeding food into Mary Geoise, keep failing whenever they're loaded, Supply lines to the world nobles are cut. For the first time in centuries, the people who consider themselves above the rest of humanity are facing something as mundane as a food shortage, which is either a coincidence or the first crack in a foundation that's about to be tested a lot harder later in this same arc. Katarina Devon and Van Alger also check in with Caribou, who's been quietly gathering intel on the ancient weapons. None of this resolves within the Elbaf Arc itself, but it's the kind of connective tissue that makes it clear the entire world is being repositioned at once, not just the Giants' Island. 2 days after the Giants left Egghead, the crew's straightforward trip to Elbaf goes sideways in a way nobody saw coming. 6 Straw Hats, Luffy, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, Sanji, and Chopper vanish, not captured, not overboard, just gone, along with the entire Thousand Sunny. The rest of the crew and the giant warrior pirates are left combing the area with nothing to go on. Nami wakes up somewhere that makes absolutely no sense. The architecture is blocky, uniform, faintly plastic in texture, like the whole environment was constructed out of oversized toy bricks. She's dressed in Viking-inspired clothing she definitely wasn't wearing before. Something has physically relocated her and redressed her while she was unconscious, and that detail alone should tell you everything about the tone this section is going for. It's not adventure, it's violation dressed up as whimsy. Cut to a different register entirely. An ancient, mysterious land, panicked, on fire, fighting to save something called Dasil, described as the mighty world tree. Giant injured bees, called Stingor, are raining down from its branches. The people here are in a full panic, discussing whether to report this to their sun god. And the sentence that lands with real weight is simple. Their sun god has fallen. Keep that phrase in your head. It's going to mean something very different by the time this section wraps up. Back with Nami, she's just taken down one of the giant stinging insects with help from Zeus, her cloud homie, and the adrenaline crash hits immediately. She's in tears, calling out for her crew with no idea where she is or how she got there, which is a rare moment of Nami's composure fully cracking, rather than being played for a beat of comic frustration. Usopp's voice cuts through the panic, and chasing after it puts her directly in the path of something called the Needle God, an enormous hostile hedgehog that starts hunting her the second it notices her. She finds Usopp, but he's got his own problem, a giant cat named Iscat. The hedgehog catches up mid-chase. Nami's lightning attack through Zeus hits both creatures at once, and rather than neutralizing the cat, it just makes it furious. Now Nami and Usopp are being chased by an enraged, electrified giant cat through unfamiliar corridors, and their working theory, since both of them remember drinking some kind of potent giant alcohol before waking up here, is that this is all a hallucination. Usopp, committed to that theory with the confidence only a drunk man convinced of his own logic can muster, plants his feet and refuses to flinch from the incoming cat. The claws are extremely real. Cornered at a dead end, they watch the cat shift into a full lion, revealing shape-shifting is on the table here, and just as it's about to finish them off, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji arrive in perfect synchronized fashion. Gear 3rd, Itoryu, Diable Jambe, all landing at once and forcing the lion back into cat form. Once the dust clears, the group dynamic snaps right back into place, which is honestly one of the funnier tonal whiplashes in the arc. Sanji's fussing over Nami's melodramatically declaring Usopp dead while he's standing right there breathing, and Luffy's already thinking about hunting more of these animals for food. Zoro, characteristically, is the only one keeping his head, pointing out that finding the ship and the rest of the crew matters more than lunch. Nami's frustration at how relaxed everyone is about their situation is completely understandable. Honestly, Sanji reasons out loud that he can't be dreaming, since there are men present and he's not enjoying himself. Zoro mentions he woke up clear across town and only found the others because Luffy was loudly eating a giant rabbit. And Usopp is the one who actually notices the detail that should have been obvious from the start. They're all dressed in traditional Elbaf-style clothing, but the tailoring fits humans perfectly. Giants don't make human-sized clothes. Someone made this specifically for them. A man riding a giant grasshopper, clearly in a rush, gives them the first real piece of context. They're in what he calls the Land of Gods, ruled by a figure known as the Sun God. He serves the ruler of Big Steen Castle, someone named Iscat, which means the giant cat they just fought moonlights as local royalty. He mentions the Needle God should be getting hungry soon, and that his own delay is because the Ear God, the rabbit Luffy ate, was burned to death, which is a sentence that sounds absurd until you realize it's describing an actual death with actual consequences in this world's internal logic. He warns them never to approach the Sun God's temple. Luffy, predictably, treats this as a direct invitation and sprints off toward exactly the place he was told to avoid. Running full speed, Luffy assumes he can just run past whatever's in his way, and instead slams into a massive mirror hard enough to crack the sky above him. The mirror shatters, revealing a netted door behind it, and the whole illusion collapses at once. This entire blocky kingdom is a diorama, built inside a room sized for something much bigger than a person. Chopper's voice calls out from somewhere nearby, and cutting through the netting reunites them with him. Looking around properly now, they find human-sized clothing scattered everywhere, clearly made for dolls, not people. Sanji clocks that the mirror was one way, meaning whoever built this could watch everyone inside without being seen. Zoro puts the pieces together out loud. Whoever did this built an elaborate stage, populated it with real humans and real animals, and watched them like entertainment. That's when the temple guards show up. A massive serpent, 3 oversized mice, and a giant raven, and Luffy, without waiting for backup, takes all of them on single-handedly. The so-called sun god enters mid-fight, horrified that his precious collection is being destroyed and his diorama is on fire, and Luffy answers by going Gear 5, his body taking on that cartoon physics, elasticity, and mopping the floor with every guard in the room. With the temple cleared, the crew commandeers Iscot as a getaway vehicle, while Nami grabs a blueprint that shows the full layout and the exit route. The sun god chases them the entire way, discovering along the route the skeletal remains of the ear god, already dead at the Straw Hat's hands, which sends him into a mix of fury and unsettling amusement. He's genuinely delighted, in a twisted way, that his miniature world has finally become alive since they arrived. Nami memorizes the stolen map and tosses it, explaining the fake clouds hanging from the ceiling are cotton, and that they've already crossed more than half the artificial land if they keep moving straight. The sun god throws an iron net over the group as a last resort, and Zoro and Sanji cut through it without slowing down, at which point the sun god, watching his own defenses get shredded, just starts laughing. The reveal, once it lands, recontextualizes everything that just happened. The sun god is Road, navigator of the new giant warrior pirates, Hajruden's crew. His entire motive is resentment. He can't stomach the idea of giants bowing to a human, and Hajruden swearing loyalty to Luffy reads to him as an unforgivable humiliation. So he did something about it. The Straw Hats had sailed straight through what's called the Sleeping Mist Belt without realizing it, a fog that knocked them all out cold, and Rhodes Raven Muggin physically carried the Thousand Sunny to him while they slept. He built his artificial world around them, dressed them as living dolls, and reset the whole display every time they started to stir. This wasn't a trap that was sprung. It was an ongoing project. Now fully awake and furious, the crew turns on him. Luffy activates Gear 4 in just his left arm, a small but telling detail about how much control he's developed over the form. Nami's rage at how she was treated, undressed and redressed like an object, comes out in full force, and Sanji is burning at the same violation on her behalf. Road, apparently incapable of reading a room even in mortal danger, mocks them by listing every crew member by name to show off how closely he's been watching them, and admits Hajruden might respect Luffy, but he never will. Nami decides that's the end of the conversation. She partners with Zeus, summons a full thundercloud overhead, and drops a strike directly on Road that leaves him paralyzed while the Lego citizens watch in terror. Luffy takes the opening, launches a Gear 4 enhanced punch straight through the wall of the artificial world, and the whole barrier shatters. What's on the other side is enough to make everyone go quiet. On the other side of that wall, the 6 missing Straw Hats find themselves standing at the base of a colossal tree that stretches so far upward it disappears past what should be the sky. This is the moment the arc actually starts, in a sense. Everything before this was prologue. Above them, on a bridge built into the tree's structure, 2 of the new giant warrior pirates, Gerd and Goldberg, are mid-argument about Road. Gerd can't understand why Hajruden let him join the crew at all, and Goldberg's answer that Road's methods are questionable but his navigation is excellent doesn't satisfy her. She goes further, saying that everyone calls Loki the shame of Elbaf, but privately she thinks Road deserves that title more. It's a small line, but it's doing a lot of work. It tells you Loki's reputation is common knowledge before he's even been introduced by name, and it tells you the giants have their own internal hierarchy of shame that has nothing to do with outsiders' opinions. They mention, almost as an aside, that they're technically supposed to arrest intruders, since Road keeps smuggling people into the country without authorization. The Straw Hats, listening from below, realize in real time that they've made it. This is Elbaf. Luffy, predictably, wants to announce himself immediately, and Nami has to physically stop him, reminding him a rest is on the table. The giants pause, sensing something, then keep walking, and the crew crosses the rope bridge below them with wolves prowling underneath. Then Luffy stops cold, goosebumps rising, his observation haki catching something enormous. He mentions hearing this same presence back in the diorama, tells the others he needs to check it out, and disappears before anyone can argue. Meanwhile, back on the Great Eyrie, the giant warrior pirate ship, the news cycle catches up with everyone in the worst possible way. Fresh headlines claim the Straw Hats attacked Egghead, and that Luffy personally killed Dr. Vegapunk. Dory and Broggy's bounties jump to 1.8 billion berries each. Robin notices something odd in Luffy's wanted photo, an X-shaped mark on his arm rendered in sharp, deliberate clarity while the rest of the image is blurred, which reads less like a printing error and more like someone wanted that specific detail visible. The giants aboard are thrilled that Luffy's bounty now matches Shanks's, and proud that Hadruden has pledged loyalty to him. They reveal Hadruden is actually the son of Elbaf's king, and that he'd wanted to personally rescue the missing crew members himself, but seniority within the giant hierarchy gave that job to others first. Then the tone shifts. They start telling a story they clearly don't enjoy telling, the tale of a cursed prince who devoted himself to darkness, was eventually crucified for his crimes, and needed every warrior in Elbaf just to bring down when he tried to escape. The worst part, they say, is that he killed his own father, King Harold, to claim a devil fruit passed down through the royal bloodline. If he ever gets free, it's the end of Elbaf as they know it. His name is Loki. At that exact moment, several levels below, Luffy finds him. A massive figure, chained, blindfolded, in a forest clearing, and despite being bound and unable to see, Loki senses him instantly, his presence filling the space before either of them says a word. Luffy, being Luffy, opens with the two most direct questions available. Where are they? And who is this guy supposed to be? Loki's answer has the weight of scripture behind it. This is Elbaf, he says, the place where all wars originate, where conflict is born and spreads out into the rest of the world. Then he goes further. He claims to be the sun god, and the one who will bring about the end of the world. Luffy, characteristically unbothered by prophecy, just gets excited that they've officially made it to Elbaf, and starts talking about how Usopp will figure it out once he climbs high enough up the tree to see for himself. Loki cuts him off, informing him coldly that he's standing in front of the sun god and has no right to speak without being given permission. His bounty, for reference, sits at 2.6 billion berries. Loki lays out his situation without much prompting. 6 years imprisoned, chained to the legendary treasure tree atom with sea stone that neutralizes his devil fruit, despite what he insists is his status as the single strongest giant in Elbaf. Then he makes an offer with the smooth confidence of someone used to negotiating from a position of apparent weakness. Free him, and he'll destroy any rival pirate crew Luffy names, no questions asked. He describes the underworld beneath them, full of beasts he calls his friends, which functions as both a description and a threat. Luffy's reaction undercuts the menace entirely, because the beasts just remind him of his training with Rusakaina during the time skip. Down here, alongside Loki, are also human prisoners who tried to fight Elbaf and lost. Forced into robes that ward off the underworld's beasts, all sworn into Loki's service. And when one of them mentions Shanks, Luffy's full attention locks in instantly. Loki, either testing him or just being cruel for the sake of it, calls Shanks a coward, and Luffy's temper ignites on the spot. He goes Gear 4 and throws a serious punch at Loki's head. Even bound in sea stone chains, Loki dodges it clean, which tells you something about what he's still capable of even neutralized. He backpedals fast, claims he was joking, but the damage to the mood is already done, and privately his thoughts turn dark. He's decided he'll kill Luffy for this later, once he's free. Luffy warns him never to joke about Shanks again, and once his anger cools, curiosity takes over completely. He wants to know why Shanks was here, whether he's still on the island, and Loki makes it clear that information isn't free. Back on the bridge, Usopp spots Road running toward them, visibly beaten, not alone. Gerd and Goldberg are chasing him down, Goldberg still carrying the Thousand Sunny like it weighs nothing. Zoro's ready to fight whoever's coming, but Usopp talks him down, pointing out these giants might well be allies of Dory and Broggy, and starting a fight blind is a bad idea. They retreat toward the nearest village instead, looking for safety and information rather than confrontation. Elsewhere, Hadruden and Stanson have just taken down a massive moose to feed the entire crew being welcomed to Elbaf, which tells you the Giants are already treating this arrival as a celebration rather than an incident. Back aboard the Great Eyrie, Brooke finishes cutting Robin's hair, and when she looks in the mirror, she's smiling at something the others don't immediately understand. Her hair now looks exactly like it did 2 years earlier, during the time skip. Dory and Broggy get it instantly, because they know why. This is how she looked the day she first met Jaguar D. Saul on O'Hara 20 years ago. The reunion she's been carrying with her for her entire adult life is finally close enough to touch. And then, almost cruelly, the Ark pulls the rug out from under that hope immediately. As the Great Eyrie finally reaches Elbaf's shores, a giant's voice rings out in panic. Saul has collapsed. He can't get up. The man Robin has waited 20 years to see again might be in real danger, right as she's finally close enough to reach him. A young giant named Cohen runs through Elbaf's streets, carrying the news that the Great Eyrie has returned, and while he runs, he remembers something Shanks once told him, to remember a specific name. Monkey D. Luffy, a rainbow appears overhead, artificially generated by something called a painter, according to Broggy, and the Great Eyrie sails directly up it as though it were solid ground. The crew watching in complete disbelief as their ship travels across something that shouldn't be able to support weight at all. 2 more ships appear alongside them, and Hodgeruden and Stanson call out asking whether Luffy is with them, informed that he'll be joining later. Meanwhile, down at ground level, Luffy swings himself back onto the rope bridge from the underworld, caught mid-air by Gerd, who's relieved to see him safe and visibly embarrassed on behalf of her crewmate Rhodes' earlier behavior. Goldberg asks what exactly Luffy was doing down there, and this puts Luffy in an immediate bind, because Loki made him promise not to tell anyone about their conversation. Luffy is, by his own crew's constant testimony, an absolutely terrible liar. And his attempt at a cover story is so unconvincing that both giants get worried enough about pressing the issue that they just drop it entirely, which might be the funniest possible outcome for someone trying and failing to keep a secret. Down in the Sunworld Road, still chasing Nami and Chopper with his enormous reach, gets ambushed by Zoro and Sanji's improvised trap, a felled tree crashing down on top of him. Gerd and Goldberg arrive with Luffy right after, delivering the finishing blows that put Road down for good this round. With the immediate threat handled, Gerd and Goldberg formally introduce themselves as members of Hodgeruden's crew and offer to guide the group, though Luffy, true to form, is already sprinting off toward the nearest village with Chopper and Usopp before the tour officially starts. Gerd ends up carrying Nami, Zoro, and Sanji while trailing the enthusiastic trio, and Goldberg hauls the Thousand Sunny to safety. On the way up, Dory and Broggy explain Elbaf's actual structure to their passengers, 3 distinct levels stacked on top of each other. The underworld at the bottom, where Luffy found Loki, the Sunworld above that, where most of the current action is happening, and at the very top, the Heaven World, which nobody's mentioned in detail yet. Both halves of the crew converge at a village at the top of the Rainbow Bridge, and the reunion is exactly as emotional as you'd expect after this much separation and confusion. As the chapter's own framing device, quoting an old explorer named Louis Arnault, who documented a previous visit to Elbaf, this land is described as a place of incredible wonders where the impossible is routine, with one cryptic warning attached: visitors should never overstay their welcome. No explanation given yet for why. The crew gets its first look at the port built directly into the world tree, complete with sea clouds letting ships sail through open sky, and everyone reunites properly. Nami compliments Robin's new hairstyle. Luffy greets Hajruden with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for people he's genuinely thrilled to see, and Hajruden introduces his crew minus Road, who's currently crucified as punishment for his stunt. Hajruden lights up talking about Big Mom's defeat, since the giants apparently have long memories and consider what she once did unforgivable regardless of how much time has passed. Luffy waves the whole topic off in favor of getting to the feast faster, but Robin steps in first, quietly insistent, before anything else happens. She needs to find Saul. Nobody argues. The entire crew falls in behind her without a second's hesitation. Gerd guides them to the Owl Library in Warrior Springs, where Saul has apparently spent years as a kind of unofficial history professor to the local giant children, and right as they approach, someone comes running with the news that he's collapsed and can't move. Nami's furious, understandably, that they've traveled this far only for this. Robin, oddly, doesn't seem surprised at all, and it turns out her instinct was right, because the moment they reach him, Saul springs up with startling speed for someone supposedly incapacitated, laughing, trying to startle her with a fake collapse he staged specifically, because he didn't know how else to open this conversation after 20 years apart. Robin doesn't even flinch. His prank falls flat immediately, and he admits it outright. He panicked and thought maybe a joke would be easier than actually facing her. What follows is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the entire arc. Saul picks her up gently, bringing her close enough to actually look at her properly, and tells her she looks just like her mother now, just like Olvia. That single comparison does more emotional work than almost any other line in the arc, because it comes from someone who actually knew both of them, someone whose memory of Olvia isn't secondhand or reconstructed from records, but lived. Then he shifts, gently, into something heavier. Does she know about Vegapunk's message to the world? She does. He explains that message was O'Hara's legacy finally reaching the outside world after all this time. The scholars, her mother, even his own actions that day, none of it wasted. Vegapunk turned their sacrifice into something that will shape the future. Robin's eyes trace the scars covering his body, remnants of Okiji's ice, and she asks if they still hurt. He tells her almost with wonder that he turned out tougher than he ever expected. He walks her through it, frozen solid by Okiji, certain that was the end, until the fire-consuming O'Hara ironically melted the ice and dropped him into the ocean instead. He found out later she'd escaped, and then read what the world press wrote about her, an innocent child painted as a monster. And it filled him with a fury he still hasn't fully let go of. Robin gently redirects him. She doesn't want to dwell on the dark parts anymore, she says, because she spent too many years already running from shadows. What she wants instead, and this is the line that breaks the whole scene open, is to be praised, not comforted, praised for surviving, for staying alive through everything the world threw at her, for making it all the way here to him. Saul doesn't hesitate for even a second. He wraps her up in the gentlest hold his massive frame allows and tells her she's magnificent, strong, incredible, that of course he'll praise her, that she survived when the entire world was actively hunting her down, found people who loved her when the world called her a demon, and made it here despite every reason not to. Robin's composure, built up over decades of controlled distance, finally breaks. She admits she missed him more than she can measure, and he tells her the same is true in reverse. The rest of the crew watches this unfold, and Luffy's smile through the whole thing is described as the biggest, most genuine one he's got, because moments like this are exactly what he lives for. Most of the crew are openly crying. Luffy himself approaches Saul with an unexpectedly formal, almost gangster boss deference, bowing and thanking him for everything he did for Robin, which confuses his own crewmates more than it impresses Saul, who just watches with amusement. Robin tries to formally introduce her captain, and Saul waves the introduction off, already well aware of Luffy's reputation, and relieved, genuinely relieved that Robin found people who'd protect her the way he always hoped she would. Robin looks at her crew and calls them her true friends, and that single phrase hits everyone except Luffy, Zoro, and Jinbe hard enough that they're all crying and declaring they'd die for her on the spot. Saul apologizes for the fake collapse, admitting the woman who'd called for help earlier was his assistant, in on the whole setup from the start. He turns to Luffy with real admiration, impressed that he's become an emperor, and asks him simply to keep protecting Robin. Luffy doesn't even need to think about the answer. Of course he will. Lilith, one of Vegapunk's satellites, arrives shortly after, and Saul doesn't recognize her at all, which she clears up by explaining what she is. Jinbe and Gerd are hauling something large and mysterious that pulses faintly with unknown energy, and when Jinbe asks what's inside, Lilith's eyes light up with excitement. It's a perfect clone of Vegapunk himself, the same one he used to visit Elbaf 20 years earlier without arousing world government suspicion. Bonnie steps forward, hope written across her whole face, asking if this means Lilith can help Kuma. Lilith's answer is careful but sincere, yes, eventually, but not until she has proper equipment, which is why she's decided to build a new lab right here on Elbaf. The moment gets interrupted, appropriately, by a group of giant children peeking out from behind a tree, asking if the grown-ups are done talking yet so they can go play. Saul's whole face softens instantly, and he waves them off to have their fun. Anne, his assistant, introduces herself properly and offers everyone a tour, though Luffy and Usopp have already bolted toward a building in the distance called the Walrus School, which Saul apparently opened 20 years ago at King Harold's request, and laughs it off and takes the rest of the group on the tour herself while Saul leads Robin to the Owl Library. Luffy and Usopp's little detour to the Walrus School ends up being one of the more quietly revealing threads of the whole arc, because it's not about action at all. It's about what peace actually looks like once you strip away the warrior mythology. They run into a group of giant children, and one of them suggests, casually, playing a game where the small humans get treated as prisoners. The other kids shut that down immediately, and not in a scolding adult-imposed way. They explain, with a kind of maturity that catches Usopp off guard, that they're not supposed to hurt humans, and they shouldn't use derogatory names either, because it's simply not polite. Usopp, who grew up on stories of giants as unstoppable, fearsome warriors, can't square that with the gentle kids in front of him, and asks more or less why giants aren't fiercer. The kids just shake their heads. Fighting is dangerous, they say, like it's the most obvious thing in the world. Mid-conversation, they realize they've been standing on someone this entire time. A calm voice from underneath them asks to be excused, and Ripley, a giant teacher at the school, rises to her full height, completely unbothered by having been stepped on. She explains the disconnect Usopp's been struggling with. The legends of fearsome giant pirates are over a century old at this point. Today's giants grew up under a very different set of values. She gestures at the peaceful scene around them and explains that King Harold wanted his people trading with other nations rather than raiding them, and the giants who lived through that shift considered him a genuine revolutionary, someone trying to drag Elbaf into a better version of itself. Then comes the wound underneath all of it. He was killed by Loki, and because of that, the giants have simply refused to acknowledge Loki as king, which has left the entire country without a functioning ruler ever since. That's not a small detail. That's a nation running on a governmental vacuum that's been open for 6 years, which is exactly the kind of gap outside forces love to exploit. Ripley's attention lingers on Luffy longer than seems casual. She mentions his transformation reminds her of a legendary warrior from Elbaf's oldest stories, and that she's from the last generation who actually remembers when warriors like that still walked the earth. It's a throwaway line in the moment, but it's connective tissue for something much bigger that gets explained properly once Robin reaches the library. Speaking of which, Saul leads Robin, along with Chopper, Lilith, and Bonnie, into the Owl Library, warning her at the threshold to be careful, because the building has an unnatural property. The moment she steps inside holding a small book, it grows to giant proportions right in her hands, matching the scale of the room around it. Saul explains this is just how the library works, and he's thrilled, genuinely thrilled, to finally get to share everything he salvaged from O'Hara with her directly. Robin stands frozen in the doorway, crying at the sight of it. The mechanism behind the library's scaling turns out to be an actual giant owl named Biblo, perched above the shelves, whose devil fruit power enlarges anything that enters his domain. Books brought from Elbaf stay giant-sized permanently, which Chopper finds out the hard way when he asks hopefully about medical texts, only to learn they're stuck at a scale no human hand can manage. Lilith identifies the phenomenon with obvious scientific delight. What actually matters here, though, is the text Saul hands Robin once they've settled in, a sacred document called the Harley. This is Elbaf's foundational scripture, and Saul explains up front why interpretations of it vary so wildly across cultures. Nobody left alive can properly translate the original language anymore. What survives is guesswork layered on top of guesswork, generation after generation. The Harley splits into 3 chapters, each describing a different version of the world, and Saul notes something striking before Robin even starts reading. Every legend about the figure called Nika consistently describes him laughing to a rhythm that matches the heartbeat sound Luffy makes in Gear 5. That's not coincidence dressed up as folklore. That's the text describing something real that hasn't happened yet in front of these giants, using language built for gods because they didn't have better words available. The first chapter describes a single unified landmass where humanity touched what the text calls a forbidden sun, and that act triggers a catastrophic reshaping of the entire world. Framed religiously as an earth god and a great serpent wrapping around the globe to shatter it. Read symbolically rather than literally, this lines up with the physical splitting of the original continent and the creation of the Red Line, the barrier that's divided the world's geography ever since. The second chapter covers an era of dreams, war, and expansion, where different people's dreams spread into open conflict, and mankind eventually kills the sun and declares itself God. That maps onto the Void Century, the era when an ancient kingdom powered by what's described as a limitless energy source was destroyed, and the resulting flood divided the remaining land into scattered islands. Crucially, the text isn't talking about a literal sun in either of these chapters. It's talking about that energy source, the same one tied to Mother Flame and to the ancient weapons that keep surfacing throughout the series. The third and final chapter describes the present age, a broken world holding on to the memory of a promised day, and unlike the first two, it actually ends on hope. It foretells the return of the sun, the end of separation, the reunion of everything that was once divided, closing on the line that they will surely meet. The mural Frankie finds later, carved deep into the treasure tree Adam, visually reflects this exact history. One side shows a full alliance of different races: giants, minks, Lunarians, samurai, fishmen, fighting side by side, suggesting a genuinely unified world that once existed before any of the current divisions took hold. The other side shows Noah, the Ark, carrying life through catastrophe, while something resembling the ancient weapon Uranus brings destruction down from the sky. Energy runs through the whole mural in a continuous, unbroken cycle, which lines up neatly with what Vegapunk described back on Egghead, an ancient, limitless power source that once fueled an entire civilization, its weapons, its prosperity, all of it. The Harley frames this power as tied specifically to dreams, made usable through the sun, and when that sun was lost at the end of the Second World. Both the energy and the birth of new devil fruits apparently stopped cold. Put together, the Harley reframes One Piece's entire history as a world broken twice over, first by the physical splitting of the land, second by the flooding of the seas, and the third world, the one everyone's currently living in, is framed as the chance to undo both, tear down the red line, reverse the flood, restore the world to something whole again. One Piece, if you want to read the title that literally. Nika isn't a traditional ruling god in this framework. He's the embodiment of liberation, born out of dreams themselves. Luffy's presence in this reading signals the literal return of the sun, not as a mythological figure exactly, but as the actual power required to build a world without scarcity, oppression, or division baked into its foundations. That reframes what the endgame of the entire series is actually about. It's not just toppling a corrupt government anymore. It's repairing something that's been broken since before recorded history. Ohara, the Void Century, Devil Fruits, the ancient weapons. Vegapunk's entire life's work, all of it converges into one single idea by the time Robin finishes reading. And it becomes pretty clear the final saga isn't just an ending. It's an attempt to fix something that's been fractured from the very start. Back with Frankie, his tour of the treasure tree Adam with Ripley covers some more grounded details before the mural discovery. Every piece of Adam wood in the world originates from this single tree, and its rarity comes down to how genuinely dangerous it is to harvest without being noticed. Along the way, they find a branch that's been deliberately severed, and Ripley explains the story behind it. A village called Hogan once lived on that branch, and it was completely destroyed when a lightning strike set the ancient wood on fire. Because the wood was so old, the fire simply wouldn't stop burning on its own, and the giants had no choice but to sever the entire branch to keep the flames from spreading through the rest of the tree. She adds, almost as a footnote at the time, that fire and lightning are Elbaf's two real weaknesses. That line stops being a footnote very quickly once the arc's back half kicks in. Meanwhile, back at the feast, Luffy demonstrates his strength in the most Luffy way conceivable, sending one of the local giant swings soaring absurdly high into the air, with two terrified children and an equally terrified Usopp clinging on for dear life. Nami's fist finds the back of his head almost instantly, sending him crashing back down while the two kids run to Gerd for comfort. Luffy, rubbing his skull and looking genuinely wounded by the reaction, complains to Usopp that Elbaf's culture feels too peaceful for his taste. Usopp, agreeing the lack of warrior training is noticeable, tries to make the case that peace is worth something too, which is about as far as that conversation gets before footsteps interrupt them. A giant child named Cohen shows up with fire in his eyes and zero interest in playing peacefully. Without any warning, he swings a wooden practice sword directly at Luffy's head, and it snaps clean in half on impact. Rather than being discouraged, both of them light up. Luffy leaps into the air, his arms swelling to full Gear 3 proportions, and slams a Gum elephant gun into the ground just short of Cohen, carving out a massive crater. Usopp's panicking, the other kids are recoiling in horror, and Luffy is grinning ear to ear, delighted to finally find someone on this whole island who isn't spineless. Cohen, far from scared, bounces with genuine excitement, calling it incredible, and yelling at the other kids to come see real strength. They call him a delinquent and a brute, He does not care even slightly. Ripley, his mother, arrives at exactly the wrong moment for the other kids, and exactly the right moment for Cohen, and her reaction is a strange but perfect blend of scolding and pride. She reprimands him for attacking their guests, then immediately adds that it was a good opening strike. Cohen hands her a basket someone named Motobe asked him to deliver, then turns back to the Straw Hats with a proud grin and announces that his father is a human, a former pirate, which explains both his half-giant heritage and his very different relationship to Elbaf's culture compared to the other kids his age. As the group starts splitting off to spend their time differently, Robin makes clear she's staying at the library with Saul through the feast. Lilith and Bonnie decide to skip the early part of the celebration to secure resident permits. Frankie's set on studying the treasure tree atom further, since it's the literal source material for the Thousand Sunnies wood. Gerd shows up with an armful of traditional Elbaf clothing for Robin, Frankie, Brooke, and Jinbi. And everyone else heads off toward the village together, minus Robin and Frankie, who've got their own plans locked in. Not everything on Elbaf is peaceful though, and the Arc makes sure you feel that contrast almost immediately. At Forest Castle, near the western village, two hooded figures approach a pair of giant guards with obvious hostile intent. One of them, messy light hair, bandages wrapped across the nose and mouth, steps forward and coldly demands to know where Loki is being held. The guards, loyal to protocol, refuse, since Loki's a criminal and his location is classified information. The response is immediate and brutal. A spray of projectiles that look like bandages wrap around one guard like living restraints, and he screams as they burn through his body before he collapses. Whatever these two want, they're not here to ask nicely twice. Back in the western village, the contrast couldn't be sharper. Giants are celebrating, raising cups and unified toasts to the Straw Hats for defeating Kaido, for defeating Big Mom, for being genuine friends to their race. Luffy spots a familiar face in the crowd, Stanson, who reminds him they first met at the human auction house on Sabaody, back when Luffy freed him from slavery and he swore, at the time, that he'd repay that debt eventually. And then a rumble shakes the ground as the eldest giant alive, Jarul, 408 years old, arrives riding a massive stag, commanding instant respect from everyone present. Luffy, incapable of letting anything slide, immediately points out that the old man has a sword lodged in his skull. Jarul laughs it off, explaining his helmet stopped it from going all the way through, though the blades clearly cut deep enough that it's uncomfortably close to full penetration through both helmet and bone. It's the kind of detail that turns a celebratory scene into a quiet reminder that even now, even at peace, Elbaf carries old violence just under the surface. The feast itself gives everyone a chance to just be people for a minute. Usopp finds an audience of giants completely enraptured by his exaggerated retelling of fighting oars, a legend they actually recognize by name. Jinbe becomes the center of curious attention over his skin color, which turns into him describing Fishman Island's full range of even more varied and vivid colorations, sparking genuine wonder and a few giants openly dreaming about someday seeing a real mermaid. Sanji naturally gushes at length about mermaid beauty, and then gets thoroughly flustered by giant women calling him cute. Brooke, a walking, joke-cracking, music-playing skeleton, turns out to be a genuine novelty, even to ancient warriors who've presumably seen a lot in their long lives. And Nami's mildly surprised to learn most giants aren't actually pirates at all, having apparently assumed the entire race was seafaring by default. Rhodes' earlier stunt hasn't been forgotten, and Gerd forces him to properly apologize to the crew. Zoro waves the apology off, but delivers his real message with a casual menace that's somehow scarier than if he'd been shouting, if Usopp hadn't stepped in earlier, Rhodes would already be dead. Rhodes physically falls over from fear. The other giants mock him for not even checking the Straw Hats' bounties before picking a fight. And Gerd herself gives Zoro explicit blessing to actually kill Rhodes if he ever tries something like that again. Rhodes, defending himself, explains he was chasing what he thinks is every giant's ultimate dream on Elbaf, becoming the sun god and ruling the world, and that single line sets off a full-blown religious argument among the surrounding giants about what the sun god actually represents. Some argue liberation, some argue destruction, some argue somewhat more lightheartedly laughter. The disagreement escalates into an actual physical fight breaking out among people arguing theology at a party. Jarul steps in to give the confused Straw Hats some historical grounding. He explains the Harley again from a giant's oral tradition perspective, and adds a detail Saul's version didn't cover. According to what they can still parse of the text, the world has ended twice before, and in both cases, someone called Nika was somehow connected to the ending. Whether Nika represents liberation, destruction, or laughter, his arrival always signals massive change, which is exactly why people in power have historically worked to erase him from the historical record. Luffy connects a dot here, remembering Bonnie mentioned the same name back on Egghead, and slowly, piece by piece, starts putting together that everyone's been calling him Nika since his Gear 5 transformation, without fully grasping yet what that actually means for his own power. The Giants share their own childhood memories of idolizing this figure, which tells you exactly how deep this runs in their culture, and Jirul mentions that both Loki and his father Harold tried, in their own very different ways, to emulate Nika throughout their lives. That detail sets up the story that follows once Luffy innocently asks whether Loki is actually a good person underneath everything. The Giants react immediately and not gently. Even before Loki was born, Harold apparently prophesied his own death at his son's hands, and shortly after the birth, Loki killed the family's lucky horse, an omen nobody in this culture takes lightly. The timing of his birth coincided, according to them, with the year Big Mom accidentally killed Joy Boy during her own childhood rampage, and since then, Elbaf's been hit with a string of natural disasters and the loss of their queen, all of which the Giants have folded into a single narrative, Loki's birth as the root of their misfortune. By age 10, he'd already made the underworld his personal playground, taming and hunting beasts adult giants feared, and periodically unleashing them on his own village just to watch the chaos. The final betrayal, the one everyone circles back to, is that he fulfilled his father's prophecy and killed Harold outright. Jirul himself was gravely wounded trying to stop that fight, carrying the scars from it to this day, and the only person who ultimately managed to subdue Loki afterward was Shanks. Luffy, hearing this, is stunned that his own mentor has this much history in Elbaf that he never once mentioned. And the Giants add one more detail that lands hard: Shanks was here recently. Luffy might have missed him by very little. Zoro, noticing something's off with Luffy, pulls him aside privately, and Luffy finally admits what happened underground with Loki. Zoro's read is immediate and logical. Everything Loki said has to be a lie, given how universally he's despised on this island. But Luffy's need to find Shanks outweighs the risk calculation entirely. If Loki knows where Shanks is, he wants to hear it, consequences later. He promises that if it turns out Loki lied, he'll beat him up for it, which is Luffy's version of due diligence. Zoro, who never met Loki in person, can't independently verify anything, so they agree the only real option is seeing for themselves. Nami, having overheard enough to sense something interesting is happening, volunteers to guide them, citing her navigation skills, though Zoro immediately clocks her actual motive once Luffy mentions Rhodes tagging along as her new personal servant, thanks to a well-timed shock from her Climattact. Nami innocently asks Rhodes whether it would be a problem if all the treasure in the castle just happened to disappear. And Zoro realizes instantly this expedition was never really about Loki at all. It's a heist with a philosophical detour attached. Deep in the underworld, the two hooded figures who'd already brutalized a pair of guards finally reach Loki himself, and reveal who they actually work for, the God's Knights, described as the world government's most elite enforcement arm. A tier above almost anything the series has shown before. They open with a recruitment pitch. Loki's answer is immediate contempt. He refuses outright, telling them he won't waste the only life he has becoming garbage like the world nobles who control the God's Knights in the first place, which is a fairly remarkable line coming from a man everyone else on the island considers the villain. The woman of the pair, Gunko, vents to her partner about how difficult intelligence gathering on Loki has been. Every single agent sent to investigate him has vanished after reporting run-ins with a giant crow named Muggin, which retroactively explains a lot about how Rhodes' Raven has been operating this whole time. Having now met Loki in person, Gunko finds his attitude intolerable enough that she considers it grounds for death outright, but her partner cautions restraint, aware they're operating in genuinely dangerous, unfamiliar territory. As if summoned by the warning itself, a massive wolf appears behind them, one of the underworld's beasts clearly answering to Loki. He orders it to kill the intruders with total casual authority, expecting this to be the end of the encounter. It isn't. Gunko doesn't flinch or run. Instead, she unravels her own clothing like living bandage material and wraps it around the wolf's throat, lifting the entire creature off the ground with unsettling ease, and offers Loki a trade, reconsider joining the God's Knights, and she'll spare it. Loki's answer tells you exactly who he is underneath the villain reputation. He tells the wolf to die in peace, admitting openly that he'll be furious and grieving afterward, but he won't compromise his beliefs to beg for a life, even one he cares about. Then he lays out his actual plan going forward, and it's bleak in a way that recontextualizes everything. Rather than waste energy negotiating the method of his own death, he intends to take every ounce of grief, rage, and frustration this moment generates and channel it directly into destroying the entire world. While that's unfolding underground, the castle heist crew, Luffy, Zoro, Nami, guided by an increasingly nervous Road, reach Orist Castle, and Road mentions almost in passing that nobody's set foot inside since King Harold died. Luffy, naturally, charges straight in without waiting for permission, and the others follow. Once inside, the scale of the place stops all three of them cold. This is architecture built entirely for giants, and Nami immediately realizes walking it on foot at human scale would be impossible. Road offers to carry them, and from his shoulder they take in what used to be a royal residence and is now a ruin. Walls cracked and half collapsed, furniture smashed to pieces, entire wings demolished. Road explains this is simply the aftermath of a king and a prince fighting each other with everything they had. That kind of collision doesn't leave anything standing. The next sight is worse. Piles of giant skeletons stacked across the ruined halls, the remains of soldiers. Road's voice goes heavy as he recounts that Prince Loki slaughtered over 100 of them that day, and that only 2 beings walked out of that massacre alive, Loki himself and Jirul. One skull in particular catches Luffy's attention, distinctive curved horns that remind him instantly of Oars back on Thriller Bark, and Road confirms the connection. Some giants carry actual ancient giant blood in their veins, beings of enormous historical power. Though no fully pure-blooded ancient giant survives today, their legacy shows up now only as inherited traits, like those horns, scattered through the current bloodline. They reach a grand hall dominated by a portrait of King Harold and his prime, prominent horns, marking his own ancient heritage clearly. Road's tone shifts to something close to reverence as he explains Harold was, by his account, the best king Elbaf ever had, someone who dreamed of connecting their isolated island to the wider world, instead of keeping it sealed off. Then comes the detail that stops everyone. Despite carrying those same powerful horns as a mark of heritage, Harold physically tore his own out. Road explains why. Harold believed the ancient giants represented an era defined by war, a violent legacy he wanted his people to leave behind for good, and removing his horns was a symbolic rejection of that entire inheritance in favor of the future he was trying to build instead. Road has one more revelation, and this one lands closer to home for the crew, since it concerns someone they already know, Hajrudin. Road reveals, flatly, that Hajrudin hates Loki more than anyone alive on this island, and the reason is entirely personal. Hajrudin is King Harold's other son. Nami's reaction is pure shock. They're brothers. Road clarifies, half-brothers, since Hajrudin's mother came from a different kingdom entirely, and that single fact opens up one of Elbaf's uglier undercurrents. She was never permitted to become queen because of her origin, and it runs deeper than politics. Elbaf treats bloodlines mixed with outside giants as a kind of pollution against their own pure heritage. Nami calls the discrimination out immediately, disgusted, and Zoro, always direct, asks Road point-blank why he serves Hajrudin at all if the giants view mixed blood this way. That question opens a memory. Road describes a genuinely lonely childhood, isolated because he preferred making maps and studying navigation over the games other giant kids played. Then he met Hajrudin, and despite being a prince, Hajrudin never once looked down on him. Seeing Road's talent, he offered real friendship without hesitation, no conditions attached. Road's voice carries real emotion describing what Hajrudin actually went through. Barred from living in the castle despite his royal blood, his mother despised, constant discrimination baked into his entire childhood, and somehow none of it turned him bitter. He built a dream instead, uniting every scattered giant tribe across the world and becoming king of all giants through his own strength alone. And Road wants to help him get there, because Hajrudin gave him friendship when literally nobody else would. That's the whole reason for his loyalty, not fear. Gratitude. That's when Luffy spots something that doesn't belong in a room full of ancient skeletons. Several giant bodies on the floor that clearly aren't old at all. These are recent. Back underground, Gunko's already revealed she ate the Aro Aro no Mi, the arrow fruit, generating limitless projectiles from her own clothing, and she's using it methodically against Loki. Arrow after arrow piercing through him while he's still chained and unable to move. Even taking the hits, he stays defiant, pointing out sardonically that he's only enduring this because he physically can't dodge. Her hooded partner finally speaks up, coldly informing Loki that it wouldn't matter even without the chains. Free or bound, he'd still fall to them. As Gunko keeps going, something becomes clear. Her arrows aren't landing randomly. They're marking specific points around his face and body in a deliberate pattern, and Loki figures out what that means before she has to explain it. These are guaranteed hit markers. Once he's tagged, the attack that follows is unavoidable, no matter what he does. She asks one more time whether he'll accept divinity and join them. He refuses again immediately, and the marked points detonate with devastating force he has no way to resist, even having predicted it. Eventually, even Loki has a limit, and he goes down. Gunko's winding up for another round when her partner finally stops her. The interrogation's over for now, he says, and pulls back his hood. What's underneath stops the scene cold. He looks almost identical to Shanks. He introduces himself, Figurlin Shamrock, son of Figurlin Garling, supreme commander of the Holy Knights, holding the rank of commander within the God's Knights himself. This isn't Shanks, but it's clearly someone connected to him by blood, and the implications ripple out immediately. Because while Shanks became a pirate emperor beloved across the New World, Shamrock enforces for the exact government structure Shanks operates outside of. Accepting that Loki will never become a usable weapon for the world government even under torture, Shamrock's response is chillingly practical. Not every piece needs to be useful, he says. Elbaf will be brought to heel regardless, and with Harold dead and Elbaf's warrior culture softened by years of enforced peace, the island is more vulnerable now than it's been in centuries. Recruitment is no longer even the goal. He orders Gunko to contact Mary Joyce directly. The plan has shifted from persuasion to conquest. When Loki comes to, his first instinct is curiosity rather than fear. He asks about Shamrock's connection to Shanks, pointing out they look identical, and when Gunko tries to shut the question down, Loki keeps pressing, arguing that pirates and world nobles occupy polar opposite ends of the world's structure, which makes their identical faces impossible to ignore. And then Shamrock answers, with total calculated coldness, delivering what amounts to one of the biggest reveals in the entire series so far. Shanks is his younger twin brother. He explains that Shanks once returned home intending to marry into their family's structure, but ultimately chose what Shamrock considers the filthy lower world instead. The revelation reframes Shanks completely. The mentor figure who saved Luffy's life as a child, beloved across the New World as one of its most respected emperors, was born directly into the bloodline the entire world considers most despised, the celestial dragons themselves. And unlike his own twin, who embraced that inheritance fully, Shanks walked away from it, choosing to live among the people his birthright would have let him rule over instead. Loki's reaction is instant and furious. Both brothers, he decides, have earned his hatred equally, and once these chains are off, he intends to make them both pay for attacking him defenseless and killing his animal companions in the process. But Shamrock has no plans for a fair fight. He draws his sword and the blade transforms, twisting into the three-headed shape of Cerberus itself. A mythical Zoan devil fruit fused directly into the weapon. Three snarling heads radiate an aura that even Loki, chained and defiant through everything else, can't shrug off. Shamrock's tone stays aristocratic and detached as he tells Loki that if he survives this, Shamrock will be waiting for round 2. Loki's voice actually wavers, admitting he can't survive an attack from something like this. His final words dripping with pure hatred for the entire world noble bloodline. As the beast prepares to strike, Shamrock and Gunko make their exit, Gunko summoning a bird construct through her powers to carry them off across Elbaf's skies, while Shamrock's mind is already 3 steps ahead, planning to use the giant children as leverage and calling in another knight to assist. Back at Forest Castle, the Straw Hats are working through the same puzzle from the other direction. The surviving guards describe their attacker, and Luffy flatly refuses to believe it was Shanks, despite the physical resemblance and Shanks' long history of visiting Elbaf. The guards start piecing it together themselves, wondering aloud whether it could have been a brother instead, in Luffy. Turning the idea over, admits he never once heard Shanks mention having any family at all, always assuming the Roger Pirates were the only family he considered his own, save for Buggy. Sitting with that thought reveals a lot about Shanks' character by omission alone. He never told the boy who idolized him about his noble birth, never let that weight touch their relationship at all. Elsewhere, Frankie's continuing his exploration of the treasure tree Atom alongside Ripley, when he stumbles on the ancient mural carved into the wood, long dismissed by most giants as childish decoration. Ripley believes it actually dates back to the Void Century itself, and this is where the imagery of the unified alliance of races and the Noah versus Uranus catastrophe comes from. tying directly back into everything Robin's simultaneously reading in the Owl Library. The two threads are converging on the same conclusion from completely different directions at the exact same moment, which is either coincidence or exactly the kind of narrative signal Oda leaves when something's about to matter a great deal more later. Back in the castle, Luffy, Zoro, and Nami, still riding on Road's shoulder, hit a glowing magic circle etched with ancient runes, ethereal energy pulsing off it in a way that makes it obvious this isn't ordinary magic. A voice echoes from everywhere in the chamber at once, and Road, thoroughly spooked, screams about a ghost and loses his grip entirely, sending everyone tumbling to the ground in a pile. It isn't a ghost. Stepping out of the shadows is Scopper Gaben, known across the world as the Mountain Eater, former left-hand man to Goldie Roger himself. He carries himself with the quiet, settled confidence of someone who's sailed the Grand Line alongside actual legends and came out the other side unbothered by much of anything since. And the revelations attached to him keep stacking. He's not just a former Roger pirate passing through. He's Ripley's partner and Cohen's father, threading him directly into everything the crew's already learned about Elbaf's current situation. Learning about their mission to free Loki, Gaben positions himself squarely between them and their goal, and poses the question that actually matters here. What happens if freeing him goes wrong? What if he becomes a threat to the whole world? Luffy, without missing a beat, answers with total confidence that they'll just beat him up and chain him again if it comes to that. Gaban's expression turns serious at how casually that answer comes out, and he delivers a fact meant to put that confidence in perspective. The only person who's ever successfully captured and bound Loki was Shanks. Nobody else has managed it. The unspoken question hanging in that statement is obvious. If it took someone of Shanks' caliber to bring him down, what does that actually say about what Loki's capable of? Even that doesn't shake Luffy's determination even slightly, which Gaben seems to recognize as a very familiar kind of stubbornness. The giants nearby fill in his backstory for context. Years earlier, protecting an injured Roger from hundreds of enemies single-handedly, Gaben fought with such ferocity that by the time the dust settled, every tree on the mountain had been leveled. That's where the nickname comes from. A man who can flatten mountains out of pure fury. Gaben makes his decision the same way he apparently once tested Roger's judgment during their years together. He'll test this kid too. He presents a challenge instead of just handing over the key he's holding. Prove your worth first. Luffy, predictably, reads this as a direct provocation and asks with a taunting edge why he even needs to fight for something Gaben could just give him. That's all it takes to ignite Luffy's competitive instincts completely. He lunges for the key immediately, and Gaben dodges every attempt with a kind of fluid, effortless movement that only comes from decades of real combat experience. Luffy complains he just wants the key so he can get back to the feast, and Gaben, deceptively casual, tells him to just take it then, before leaping into the air and coating the key itself in dense armament haki, bringing it down on Luffy with enough force to bury him in dust and debris. When the dust clears, Luffy's expression has shifted from carefree to genuinely angry, and Gaben's attention lands on the reason why: the straw hat. He points out almost affectionately that it suits Luffy better than the helmet he's currently not wearing, and mentions he knows exactly what that hat represents, since he's holding onto it for Shanks. Then, without warning, he turns cruel about it, calling Shanks a cheapskate for never actually giving Luffy the hat outright. That lands like a direct hit. Luffy explodes, telling Gaben not to talk down about Shanks without knowing him at all, and Gaben's response is immediate and brutal. He shoves the key straight into Luffy's mouth and sends him crashing into a wall with enough force to crack it. Then he draws twin axes, calls out an attack named Yaso Akaru, and unleashes a flurry of strikes so devastating the air itself seems to tear, and the castle's foundations start crumbling around them. Zoro doesn't hesitate. Sensing the danger to his captain, he intercepts Gaben's assault with all three swords, steel ringing out hard enough to send shockwaves through the already damaged castle. For the first time, something like real approval crosses Gaben's face as he looks at Zoro, acknowledging out loud that Luffy's found himself a genuinely good crew. Both of them square up fully now, Luffy shifting into Gear 5, ready for an actual fight. And then, in the last turn nobody sees coming, Gaben simply raises his hands and yields. The sudden surrender knocks both fighters off balance completely, and they crash to the ground more confused than victorious, both yelling at him to take this seriously. Gaben, infuriatingly calm, just points at the ground near them, where the key's now sitting well within reach. It's already theirs, he says, like that was obvious the entire time. Road tries to explain who Gaben actually is, but Gaben cuts him off gently, telling him not to rush things. As he starts to walk off, he leaves them with something that reads as half advice, half challenge. If Elbaf's still standing by the time they leave, they should come find him. The implication couldn't be clearer. He expects trouble to come looking for this island regardless of anything the Straw Hats do. Luffy and Zoro, still annoyed the fight ended the way it did, refuse the invitation out of pure stubbornness. As Gaben walks away, his mind drifts back to an old memory, a conversation with Shanks, who'd been trying to convince him of something regarding Luffy specifically. Gaben's skeptical, half-remembered voice from the past asks why he should trust him at all, and Shanks, with his usual laid-back detachment, simply tells him to do whatever he wants. In hindsight, it plays almost like Shanks laying groundwork for exactly this moment, years in advance, without ever explaining why. Everything up to this point has been build-up, honestly. Even the parts that felt like action. What happens next is where the arc stops teasing an invasion and actually starts one. At the Walrus School, chaos erupts without warning as children start screaming. A massive serpent called Jormungandr tears through the school grounds, something huge and clearly not native to this level of Elbaf. Inside the faculty room, a teacher named Blade bursts in, shouting that a giant snake from the underworld has somehow surfaced in the Sunworld, which shouldn't be physically possible under any normal circumstance. The staff are stunned. Principal Ka orders someone to alert the local chiefs immediately, and another teacher, Anne, points out the obvious gap in that plan. Who's protecting the kids in the meantime? Ka doesn't hesitate. He grabs a hammer and runs straight at the threat himself, and it turns out his past as a warrior wasn't just a rumor, because he engages the serpent head-on with real skill. Saul, meanwhile, drops in from above with a devastating finishing blow, and together they bring the creature down. The children, watching in stunned silence, can't quite process that their principal used to be a fighter, while others are just as floored by Saul's raw strength. The relief doesn't last. A cry for help rings out, and the gym teacher, Wolf, has been seriously wounded. Even bleeding out, he's more worried about the kids than himself. Which tells you something about the culture this school was actually built to nurture. Another teacher delivers worse news. Several children are missing entirely. Saul takes off to find them immediately, but Wolf calls out a strange, specific warning after him. Don't touch the children. Nobody understands it yet. The search reveals the missing kids walking. All of them. Moving in eerie unison straight toward the beach. They're sleepwalking, and it turns out they're following an arrow, one of Gunko's, controlling their movement remotely through her devil fruit ability. The teachers panic and decide their only option is to sound the Great Horn, Elbaf's emergency signal, warning the entire island at once. That's when Ka spots something worse waiting in the surrounding forest. Monsters lurking, not natural to this place at all. The horn sounds anyway. Moments later, they get an update that turns the situation from bad to horrifying. The children are collapsing one by one, losing consciousness mid-walk. Chopper immediately starts examining them, trying to figure out what's actually happening to their bodies. Deep underground, Loki's already near free of his chains, one sea-stone shackle remaining, and he warns the Straw Hats directly not to underestimate what he can still do even partially restrained. To prove the point, he raises his weapon, Ragnir, and strikes the treasure tree atom itself. And the result is immediate. A colossal bolt of lightning slams down out of nowhere, setting the southern section of the island on fire. Flames start climbing fast. Above ground, the entire feast grinds to a halt as the news spreads, and the giants remember, all at once, what Ripley told Frankie earlier about fire being Elbaf's greatest weakness. Back at the school, Anne finally explains the origin of the nightmare creatures to Saul. Earlier that day, she'd given the children a simple assignment: draw what scares you most, meant as a gentle exercise in confronting fear. The results now make horrifying sense. Every monster currently attacking the island matches something a specific child drew. Some drew Loki, terrified he'd destroy everything. Others drew Nika, worried his power might bring chaos rather than salvation. Some drew Fenrir, the wolf of legend. Others drew storms, ghosts, and apparently exactly the giant serpent they'd just fought off. And remembers one girl in particular, Yuriha, who'd complained the assignment gave her nightmares afterward. At the time, Anne chalked it up to a normal, overactive imagination. Now she understands the drawings themselves have somehow become real, physically manifesting to attack the very children who feared them. High above the treasure tree, the gods' knights watch the whole unfolding disaster like spectators at a show, all of them present except Shamrock, who's still occupied elsewhere. One of them, killing him, casually takes credit for the creatures, mentioning there's a built-in time limit on the whole operation. These monsters only persist until the children reach the ship. He wonders aloud, almost bored, whether anyone will figure out the truth before then. Another one, Summers, speaks cryptically to Gunko, telling her that to know love is to wound someone, then asking what she's most afraid of. Without hesitation, she answers, Nika. The legendary sun god terrifies her more than anything else in the world, which is a strange, telling admission from someone working directly for the people trying to erase him from history. Saul, meanwhile, is racing toward the sleepwalking children, trying to physically wake them. Robin warns him to be careful, remembering Wolf's warning specifically. He doesn't see anything visibly wrong with the kids, just children walking in a trance, so he reaches for one of them anyway, a girl named Yuriha, and the moment he touches her, something invisible tears through his hand. Thorns, completely undetectable, surrounding her. He recoils in genuine pain, finally understanding what Wolf was trying to tell him, and reaches the giants still at the feast and relays the situation. The sleepwalking children are on a direct path toward the fire Loki just started. The firefighting squad mobilizes immediately, flying toward the blaze to put it out before the kids arrive. Mid-flight, they get ambushed by one of Killingham's creatures and knocked clean out of the sky, which sends a wave of shock through everyone watching from the ground. Above it all, the knights are eating a meal together while treating the destruction below as pure entertainment. Summers finds it hilarious how shocked the giants were getting stabbed by invisible thorns, and explains his own power casually. He's eaten the Ibara no Mi, letting him generate completely invisible thorny vines, ideal, in his words, for trapping people without warning. He describes his ability with a strange philosophical flourish, something about how even love has its thorns, clearly proud of the metaphor. Gunko, sitting nearby, shows total indifference to his musings. He keeps going anyway, explaining that love is exactly what draws people into danger despite the thorns surrounding it, since parents will always try to reach their children no matter the cost, which is precisely what makes this whole exercise entertaining to him. Gunko still isn't interested. Killingham asks which route Gunko chose for the children, and she explains she deliberately picked the path leading straight past the village's sea clouds, visible enough that every giant on the island can watch their own helplessness play out in real time. It's meant to be demoralizing on purpose. Killingham then casually complains about needing more salt for his meal, which triggers Summers to start daydreaming about salt appearing on the table. And Killingham responds by lulling Summers to sleep at the table itself, reaching into his dream and pulling real physical salt directly out of his imagination. That's the reveal of his actual power, the Ryu no Mi, Model Kirin, a mythical Zoan that lets him transform into the legendary creature and, more importantly, manifest people's dreams into tangible reality. Summers wakes up and asks about the sleep children's dreams Killingham extracted earlier, and Killingham explains he can do both simultaneously, put people to sleep and pull their dreams into the physical world at the same time. Gunko notes that all that's left now is loading the children onto one of the giants' boats back to Mary Jiwis, and the mission's effectively complete. Summers complains that this whole operation has been too easy, hoping for more resistance. Gunko reminds him trouble's still coming, since the Straw Hats are on the island too, and they might interfere before this wraps up. The three of them notice the children are heading straight into the spreading fire, and their collective reaction is chillingly transactional if the kids burn. They'll just find more children to kidnap somewhere else. Individual lives mean nothing in this calculation. Down in the underworld, Loki's still standing, Ragnir in hand, telling Hodrudin flatly that he can't stop him, since Hodrudin isn't even strong enough to lift the weapon himself. He demands the last shackle removed immediately, threatening to kill everyone in the Sunworld if they refuse. Hodrudin reluctantly agrees to back down, but Zoro warns him against giving in to the threat. Luffy attacks anyway, and because Loki's already so severely injured, the blow, weak as it is enough to drop him. Once he's down, Luffy and Zoro climb onto his massive frame to check on him, and Zoro figures out the truth. Loki was bluffing the entire time, putting on a show of strength while actually just looking for a way to collapse without losing face. He was already completely spent. Road, watching this unfold, starts putting together who actually attacked and injured Loki this badly, his mind circling back to the Shamrock look-alike they'd encountered earlier. Luffy, seeing Loki unconscious and clearly suffering, begs Hodrudin not to let him die, no matter what he's done in the past, because in Luffy's worldview, everyone deserves saving. Gerd steps in to treat him, and her assessment is grim. It'll take months for a full recovery. He can't stay down here either, since the underworld isn't suited for healing, but taking him up top means near certain death, because the Sunworld hates him enough to kill him on sight. As she works, Luffy notices something, Loki's horns are completely real, not decorative, and the giants confirm what Rode already explained, that they're a remnant of the ancient giant blood he inherited from Harold. Hearing his father's name pulls Hadrudin back into memory. He remembers Harold calling both of them his sons, hoping they'd support Elbaf together after his death, envisioning a genuine partnership between brothers. Reality broke that vision completely. Loki looked down on Hadrudin for being physically weaker despite being the older sibling, constantly insulting him, mocking his mixed heritage as inferior. That memory alone is enough to push Hadrudin toward drawing his axe with full intent to finally kill Loki here and now. Years of accumulated grief and rage finally reaching a breaking point. But before he can strike, Loki, barely conscious, tells him to either get over his personal grudge or actually look at the full situation clearly, because there's more happening here than Hadrudin realizes. Then he asks directly, does Hadrudin genuinely believe he killed their father in cold blood, exactly the way everyone assumes? Was it really premeditated? The question just hangs there, suggesting the accepted version of events might not be the whole truth. Elsewhere, Ripley brings Frankie to an ancient scientific facility covered in vines, clearly ancient, and completely out of place on an island defined by warrior culture. Lilith and Bonnie, who'd technically gotten lost and stumbled onto it by accident, are already inside, and Lilith estimates the structure's roughly 3,000 years old. Frankie's skeptical, but Ripley backs the estimate up, pointing out the giants have zero historical record of this building anywhere in their archives. Lilith immediately decides to claim it as her new lab. Before Frankie can even step inside to look around, Bonnie spots something behind them, one of Killingham's manifested nightmares, this one taking the shape of a lightning cloud with a face, hovering with obvious menace. Frankie initially assumes it's just some strange natural Elbaf phenomenon, but Ripley corrects him fast. Nothing about this belongs here. Back at the western village where the feast was happening, a massive skeletal creature called a Draugr starts tearing through buildings, and the celebrating warriors sober up fast, forced into combat they weren't remotely prepared for. Dory and Bragi are conspicuously absent at the worst possible moment. And the reason turns out to be almost funny under different circumstances. They drank so much they're both stuck in the bathroom. The giants, seeing the Straw Hats present, try to move them somewhere safer, but Usopp, quietly and nervously, insists they actually want to help fight. Cohen tries to insist he's a warrior too, son of Skopper Gaben after all, but the adults shut that down fast, sending him to shelter with the other children instead. Nami, meanwhile, catches Jarul up on what happened at Orist Castle, relaying what the injured guards described, a Shanks look-alike, and a second intruder using some kind of unidentified devil fruit power. Jinbei, listening, connects the dots quickly, suggesting the massive monsters currently rampaging might be connected to whoever was at that castle. Jarul orders the entire country alerted about these intruders on sight. Nami's furious hearing all this laid out, outraged that anyone would abduct children in broad daylight, while Usopp worries about what ransom or demand is coming once the kidnappers have leverage. Jinbei offers to help hunt the intruders down, but Jarul refuses, citing simple hospitality. Guests hide, they don't fight. Full stop, giant pride on the matter is non-negotiable. Once the giants leave to organize their defense, Jinbei makes a practical observation to the rest of the crew. If these intruders are human-sized like they are, the Straw Hats would have a far easier time handling them than the giants would, while the giants are better suited for the oversized monsters. Splitting the labor just makes sense. The obvious problem is scale. The country's too vast to cover on foot in any reasonable time. That's when Nami spots Cohen dragging a bag of weapons, clearly planning to sneak off and fight despite being explicitly told not to. The 4 Straw Hats approach him, and once he realizes they're not going to stop him or rat him out, he agrees to let them ride his boar. On one condition, they make him captain of the expedition. It's a small price for transportation. Above, the 3 knights hear the announcement that non-Straw Hat humans have been spotted on the island, and they treat the warning with total indifference. Summers notices Gunko listening to music and calls it her post-meal ritual, which she flatly denies, clarifying it's not a ritual at all, just something she enjoys without ceremony attached. Summers shares his own tastes, mentioning he prefers live musical performances specifically because he can shoot whoever flubs the first note. He asks what she's listening to, and her answer, New World, one of Brooke's own songs, lands with an odd weight, because it means the Straw Hats' musician's work has reached even the God's Knights themselves. Summers laughs, mocking her for apparently being dissatisfied with the current world, but Killingham cuts the joke short, scolding him for mocking someone else's genuine interests. Summers apologizes immediately. Killing him shifts the subject back to the adults desperately trying to save their kids below, watching it all like entertainment once again. Back with Saul and the children, he's improvised a new strategy, 2 large shields to block the invisible thorns, hoping if he can't touch the kids directly, he can at least intercept the trap around them. It works, briefly, stopping one child cold. But then another sleepwalking kid collides into the one he just stopped, and the thorns surrounding both activate at the point of contact, hurting them simultaneously. Saul watches in horror as the trap punishes the children no matter what anyone tries. Robin, disgusted by the design's cruelty, suggests hunting down the source directly, the devil fruit users themselves, arguing that stopping the cause is the only real solution. Saul warns that leaving to search means the children keep marching, unslowed, straight into the fire still spreading through the tree. He improvises again, roping one child from a distance like a cowboy, avoiding direct contact entirely, and just as he lands it, a Fenrir, a giant nightmare wolf, appears to attack him. That's when Saul realizes the full shape of the operation. These monsters aren't random hazards. They're guards, specifically deployed to stop anyone from interfering with the children's forced march toward the ship. Back at the western village, the Draugr finally goes down under combined giant effort, though several warriors take real damage getting there. It's not over. 2 more creatures appear, a Nidhogg and a Spectre, and both prove too much for the exhausted warriors to handle, forcing a full retreat. That's when Dory and Bragi finally show back up, freshly emptied of stomach contents and ready to fight. Their signature combined attack, a synchronized Haoshoku strike, obliterates both the Nidhogg and the Spectre instantly, plus a 3rd creature that happened to be approaching. They apologize for being late, explaining they'd been throwing up the alcohol they drank to sober up fast, and they're now furious that such good, expensive liquor got wasted in the process, looking for payback against whoever forced that sacrifice. Alongside their return, Skopper shows up too, joining the fight directly, and the sight of these legendary figures rallying gives everyone still standing real hope that this fight is winnable. Elsewhere, Goldberg, Zoro, and Sanji go hunting in the underworld for meat to help Loki recover, and cross paths with a massive, aggressive dinosaur called Gyrosaurus. Goldberg's sentient shield, named Nas, blocks its bite while it's distracted, and Sanji launches Zoro directly into the air, letting him come down and decapitate the creature in a single clean strike. Goldberg mentions the meat's actually delicious stewed in alcohol, and when Sanji points out he didn't bring any for cooking, Goldberg tells him there's a hunting cabin nearby stocked with supplies. Zoro, curious, asks why Goldberg's shield is alive at all, wondering if it's a devil fruit power, and Goldberg explains the truth. His father encountered Big Mom on an expedition years ago, and Nas was given life through her Soru no Mi, making it a homie, just like Nami's Zeus. Goldberg admits he was surprised to learn a homie of that caliber ended up working with the Straw Hats at all. Back with the main group, Loki tells everyone he was attacked by the God's Knights, a claim that shocks the giants present, since actually encountering the God's Knights is rare enough to be nearly mythical. Hadruden wonders aloud if this was retribution for something Loki did during his own past rampages at sea, but Loki shuts that theory down immediately. If he'd gotten far enough out to actually cross paths with the God's Knights under normal circumstances, he claims, he'd already be king of the world by now. He never made it that far from Elbaf. Back with Loki and the group, Goldberg, Zoro, and Sanji return from their hunt, and the giants get a fire going to cook the meat immediately. Once it's ready, Luffy, eager to help, shoves it straight into Loki's mouth without letting it cool, and the scalding meat burns straight through his mouth and throat. Loki, in genuine pain, asks if Luffy's actually trying to kill him through his own open wounds, which is the opposite of the intended help. He eats it anyway, since he needs the nutrition regardless. But lying on his back makes swallowing difficult, and he starts choking. Luffy panics and grabs a cup of soup to help wash it down, except the soup's fresh off the fire and just as scalding, and in his rush he spills it directly onto Loki, burning him again on top of everything else. Loki demands, loudly, that Luffy be kept as far away from him as physically possible, since every attempt to help just makes things worse. Gerd, watching all of this, gives Luffy an approving thumbs up, which reads less like encouragement and more like quiet satisfaction that Loki's getting burned a little as informal karma. Zoro's still turning the story over in his head, suspicious that Loki might be lying about the whole promise he made Luffy earlier. And Loki clarifies he isn't lying exactly, just withholding, and he won't get into more detail about himself until the last shackle's actually gone. Until he's fully free, he's not opening up completely. Still, he admits something surprisingly personal. He understands exactly what Luffy's feeling, wanting to reunite with an idol. He felt that same pull once, as a kid, though he regrets he was only ever a child at the time it mattered. If he'd been older or stronger, things might have gone differently. That admission opens into a flashback. A young Loki, still just a boy, desperately wanted to join the crew of the Rock's pirates, idolizing Rox D. Zebek as the ultimate warrior of his era. Rox refused outright, unwilling to bring a child along on voyages that dangerous. Loki, stubborn and determined to prove himself worthy anyway, challenged Rox to a fight and got beaten badly for the attempt. The power gap between them laid completely bare. Back in the present, Loki laments simply being born in the wrong era, wondering if things would have gone differently if he'd arrived earlier, or if Rox had lived longer. Up in the Sun World, Dory and Bragi are still fighting off waves of Draugr and Spectre-type creatures that keep spawning, and Gaben takes down one shaped like Loki with a single clean strike, commenting afterward that he's almost relieved these are just manifested children's nightmares. Because if the kids ever met the real Loki, the fake versions might actually turn out stronger by comparison. It's a dry, almost darkly funny observation about how reputation can outpace reality. Then Gaban uses observation haki and picks up the presence of the god's knights somewhere on the island, and his expression turns fully serious. If even Elbaf isn't safe from the world government's reach anymore, he says, then the world really is ending. This island's always functioned as a sanctuary beyond their control. That's no longer true. The firefighting squad, meanwhile, can't extinguish the wildfire fast enough. It's simply too large, consuming ancient wood faster than they can douse it. Saul, having just put down the Fenrir attacking him, calls out for them to move faster, since the sleepwalking children are nearly at the flames. Above, Gunko and Summers watch like it's theater, and Summers asks something genuinely disturbing. Will the pain wake them up once the fire actually touches them? Gunko answers with total emotional flatness, describing exactly how the kids will wake up mid-burn and cry out for their parents as they die, delivered with the same tone someone uses to describe the weather. Summers finds the mental image funny. The firefighters lose the race. The children, still trapped in their trance, start walking directly into the flames. Then, without warning, a massive wave of water crashes down from above, extinguishing the blaze completely. Jinbei, using a technique called Umi Kumo Yonoi, hurled an entire mass of sea cloud moisture at the fire with enough force to kill it outright, saving the kids at literally the last possible second. They're safe from the fire at least, but still walking, still following Gunko's arrow toward whatever waits at the end of it. The giants, seeing the fire go out, praise the firefighting squad for their apparent success, not realizing they weren't actually responsible. Robin, watching closely, suspects Jinbei's nearby, recognizing his technique on sight. On Cohen's board, the mood briefly lightens as he opens up emotionally to the group, admitting most of the other kids at school dislike him. Probably for his eagerness to prove himself or his connection to Gaben. But being disliked doesn't change his intentions. He's still going to help the other children when it matters, regardless of how they feel about him personally, which is a small, genuine moment of heroism from someone barely old enough to understand the stakes. That's when Gunko appears directly on the bow of his boat, having watched them the entire time and finally deciding to show herself. She muses out loud that the school isn't the only place to find a kid as energetic as Cohen, confirming she's specifically targeting him. Jinbei, analyzing the situation, figures she must be one of the intruders who injured the castle guards earlier. But Gunko bristles at being called human at all, insisting instead she's a god. Nobody on the boat understands the distinction she's drawing. Nami and Cohen, both furious, demand she return the children immediately, but she tells Cohen to shut it while she lays out her reasoning. The kids are simply too physically large to transport while conscious, so putting them to sleep and controlling them was the only practical option. Their destination is Mary Joyce, the world government's holy land. Jinbei asks directly if she's a celestial dragon herself, and Usopp points out she looks nothing like the world nobles he's seen, who typically wear bubble helmets and carry themselves with obvious pomposity. Brooke, surprisingly, is the one who puts it together. She's a member of the God's Knights. Gunko confirms it without hesitation. Usopp asks if she's planning to enslave the kids, and in response, she sends one of her arrows chasing directly after him across the deck. Nami refuses to let this stand, summoning Zeus in shark form and launching him straight at Gunko. But Gunko simply redirects the attack back at Nami using her powers, and as she does, she starts explaining something with an unsettling calm. Originally, the world was supposed to simply vanish, quietly, without anyone realizing it was happening at all. The redirected Zeus attack nearly hits Nami until Brook throws himself in the way at the last second, absorbing the blow meant for her. Gunko keeps talking through it, explaining that a handful of people eventually figured out the truth and warned the world before it could happen. As she's speaking, Usopp lands a direct hit with his pop greens, an explosion powerful enough to appear, briefly, to have obliterated her entire upper body. To everyone's horror, she regenerates completely, unaffected. A regenerative ability that echoes the Five Elders' own known powers. She declares flatly that nothing can stop the countdown, whatever that means, and marks Usopp as her next target with another arrow. Jinbei, Nami, and Brook all scramble to redirect the arrow away from him, working together under pressure, while Gunko drops the actual scale of what's coming. A war that will consume the entire world is approaching, inevitable at this point, and whichever side Elbaf's giants choose to fight for will meaningfully shift the outcome. That's the entire reason the world government wants them under control specifically. Nami refuses to accept something this catastrophic is really coming, and Jinbei calls Gunko and her employers cowards outright for resorting to kidnapping children just to force a nation's hand. Gunko's response is almost bureaucratic in its coldness. She's just following orders. Then she adds something worse. She genuinely does not care whether the children live or die. To her, they're disposable, tools with no individual value whatsoever. The crew calls her exactly what she is, a monster who sees kids as objects to discard. Cohen, enraged past the point of caution, steps forward to fight her directly, unwilling to let her hurt his friends or take him without resistance. Gunko's faster. She lassos an arrow around his throat and lifts him clean off the deck, and when Jinbei and Brook both try to intervene, she uses a technique called Aloe, redirecting their own attacks into each other instead, knocking both of them overboard into the sea clouds below. With them gone, she kicks Nami off the ship next, then lands a full direct hit on Usopp that drops him instantly. In moments, she's cleared the entire boat, all 4 Straw Hats down or overboard, Cohen captured as her hostage. Elsewhere, over at Din Din Mushi, Summers checks in with Killingham, who's already at the Walrus School, having just taken down both Principal Ka and the teacher Anne. Anne's body is completely locked in place by one of Killingham's abilities called Mien, unable to move at all. Summers complains that Elbaf's communication infrastructure is too primitive for what they need, and Killingham agrees, but points out every village and major facility across the country has its own transmission device linked together, letting a single broadcast reach the whole island at once. He tells Summers to speak into a standard Din Din Mushi, which will feed his voice through to every linked device simultaneously. Summers says he'll make the announcement once he's finished his current fight, currently against Saul, and mentions with genuine surprise that he'd assumed Saul died back when Ohara burned. Saul, badly injured and barely upright, tells Robin and Chopper, who've been hiding in his hair this entire time for safety, to keep hiding no matter what happens next, and begs them to save the children regardless of what happens to him. Those are his last words before he goes down, defeated by Summers. With Saul out of the fight, Summers begins monologuing, rejecting the entire premise that giants should be a peaceful people. In his view, their strength is wasted on peace, and should instead serve the world government as soldiers and mercenaries, and he squarely blames Harold for transforming Elbaf from a warrior nation into a land of pacifists, viewing that decision as an active betrayal of what giants are supposed to be for. Backing up slightly before this confrontation, Saul had pulled Robin and Chopper aside and warned them specifically about Summers, explaining he's encountered him before and knows exactly who he is, a member of the God's Knights, and according to Saul, all of them share some form of immortality. That's exactly why he wanted the two of them to wait for the right moment to act rather than rushing in blind. Back in the present, Summers stands over the fallen Saul, mocking the Marines' sloppiness and how they handled Ohara's destruction all those years ago. Gunko arrives shortly after with several captured Straw Hats in tow, restrained by her powers. Summers asks whether they're taking these prisoners back with them, but Killingham, listening nearby, shuts that idea down fast, warning that holding them captive will only invite Luffy's direct wrath. Finish the mission, he says, and leave. Nothing more. Among the captured crew, Nami immediately blames Jinbei for letting the situation get this far, while Jinbei quietly works through how to fight back despite being restrained. Brook keeps staring at Gunko, certain he's seen her somewhere before, something tugging at a memory he can't quite place. Gunko, in response, points an arrow-forged sword directly at him, demanding he become her personal slave and write music for her forever. Everyone's caught off guard learning she's genuinely a fan of Brook's work. Brook refuses without hesitation, explaining he's already sworn loyalty to Luffy and won't break that vow for anything. Gunko threatens to kill him over the refusal, and Brook states plainly that he'd rather die than betray his captain. She starts beating him for it, and strangely at some point during the assault, she grips at her own chest, as though something about this is affecting her on a level that isn't purely combat. Summers watches this and tells Gunko he'd rather not fight Luffy either, then turns to Killingham to check if everything's ready. Killingham confirms it is. Summers begins his broadcast across all of Elbaf through the hijacked communication network, announcing that everything strange happening across the island is their doing, that he's from Mary Joyce as a member of the God's Knights, and that they've taken 10 of Elbaf's children hostage. He mentions Saul's been badly injured trying to stop them. Killingham asks Anne for the full list of kidnapped children's names, wanting their parents to know precisely who's been taken, and while he talks, he wakes the children from their induced sleep. They come to, confused, disoriented, realizing they're standing on branch 8 of the World Tree, and quickly discover their bodies won't respond to their own commands. They can't stop walking no matter how hard they try. Cohen, now among the captives himself, tells the group they've all been kidnapped, which sends the other children into tears, terrified and calling for their parents. Cohen, scared as everyone else, still tries to be brave, telling them he's there and he'll protect them, even as the massive nightmare creatures loom overhead, watching every move. On the Great Eyrie, the giant warrior pirates try turning back to rescue the children, but one of Killingham's creatures tears a hole straight through their ship. This particular monster resembles a woman, and disturbingly, one that looks like a giant's actual wife. As the giants process this in growing horror, they realize the pattern. Some of these creatures resemble their own spouses, meaning some of the children's deepest fears are in fact their own mothers when angry. The sea clouds supporting the Great Eyrie get torn away entirely by these mother-shaped monsters, and the ship crashes. From a distance, Summers watches it happen, and understands the giant warrior pirates are effectively neutralized now. He turns his broadcast toward Jarul directly, addressing him as the boss of the giants given Elbaf's kingless state, and lays out their actual demand: total subordination, the giants serving as a military force for the world government going forward, with the kidnapped children as immediate leverage, and starts reading the list of kidnapped names over the broadcast, including a girl named Yuriha and a boy named Olaf, revealed to be Omo's grandson. Then Summers reveals one more detail meant to twist the knife. One child, Cohen, tried to be a hero and ended up captured along with everyone else. Ripley, hearing this over the broadcast, reacts with pure horror. Her son tried to save others and it's only put him in greater danger as a result. Summers lays out the full demand clearly: destroy the school, destroy the library, burn every book inside it, and swear total loyalty to the God's Knights and the world government. And answers with real emotion, explaining the school represents everything Elbaf has become as a peaceful society, and the library holds not just their own ancient history, but the preserved knowledge of the wider world, saved specifically by the scholars of Ahara who died protecting it. To the giants, both buildings are sacred, and more than that, they belong to the whole world, not just to Elbaf. Summers, entirely unmoved, just tells her to calm down. Hearing all of this, Gaben decides to move. His son is among the captured children, and he has no intention of standing by. At the same moment, Robin makes her own decision, unwilling to let the God's Knights destroy everything her people's sacrifice built. One of the kidnapped children, a girl named Ranja, gets separated from the group. Walking an arrow path Gunko laid specifically to lead her off the edge of the branch entirely. At first she tries to hold her composure, but the moment she actually looks down and registers the drop, she freezes completely. Gunko, positioned near her, reports to Summers that the first execution is ready, meant to force the giants into compliance. Summers instructs Gunko to broadcast Ranja's voice across all of Elbaf, and sets a time limit, 30 seconds to decide, or she falls into the underworld below. He repeats the demand once more: burn the school, burn the library. Giants surrounding Jarul immediately start arguing, some insisting the library can't possibly be destroyed, since it holds 1,000 years of accumulated words and history, utterly irreplaceable. Others push back just as hard, arguing no building or book matters more than a child's life. The argument widens further, because underneath the immediate crisis is the larger, harder question: whether Elbaf complies and becomes a servant of the world government permanently, giving up the freedom it's held onto this whole time. As the arguing escalates, giants across the crowd start openly begging for someone, anyone, to find a way out of this impossible choice. Robin, listening to all of it, makes her decision. She knows attacking Summers directly won't do lasting damage given his apparent immortality, but she can't stand by and do nothing regardless. Nami, still restrained, is beside herself with fury. Ripley, Dory, and Bragi settle on a plan of their own, split the remaining forces. Half the giant warrior pirates plus Frankie rush to rescue the children directly. The rest stay to hold off the remaining nightmare creatures still attacking. Summers, continuing his broadcast, adds a final cruelty to the demand when the library burns. Every book inside burns with it. Nothing preserved. Nothing salvaged. The goal isn't just destroying a building. It's erasing the giant's entire recorded history and culture, leaving nothing behind at all. Robin moves. She attacks Summers directly with her devil fruit power, using Cianflora Craspidia, drawing blood and restraining him with 4 extra arms in an attempt to actually break his spine. The captured Straw Hats cheer, briefly hopeful she's actually taken him down, but Summers simply heals, his body regenerating exactly as expected from someone with his ability. Calmly, mid-repair, he informs all of Elbaf they now have 20 seconds remaining. Robin doesn't stop. She grabs him and throws both of them off the branch entirely, plummeting toward the underworld together, reasoning as they fall that getting him far enough from the children should put them outside the range of his invisible thorns. Summers, genuinely impressed by the strategy, stabs her anyway, only to discover it was a decoy, a clone. The real Robin's already elsewhere, working to cut Gunko's arrow restraints off the captured crew with a knife, though the arrows prove too durable to cut through conventionally. She realizes taking down Gunko herself is the only way to actually break the hold. Summers, meanwhile, saves himself from the fall, using his own thorn powers to climb back up, announcing there are only 10 seconds left. Gunko, standing beside Ranja at the edge of the branch, demands she say something for the broadcast, wanting her to beg for her life on air. Instead, Ranja speaks with a clarity that stops the entire island cold. She tells Jarul she loves school, because that's where her friends are. She loves the library and everything it represents, and she says the one real thing school taught her is not to cause trouble for other people, so if saving her means burning down everything the school and library stand for, she'd rather fall instead. She tells Jarul she'll be okay. She calls herself a lucky girl. Jarul makes the call. With a heart clearly breaking under the weight of it, he orders Anne to burn the school and the library. Anne, in tears, has no other choice and carries out the order anyway. Robin, watching, is brought fully to tears herself, and that's when Summers, having climbed back up, restrains her again with his thorns, finally recognizing her properly as Nico Robin, the O'Hara archaeologist, and raises his thorns for what's meant to be a finishing blow. His arm gets severed clean before he can land it. Summers stares at the stump in genuine shock, because it doesn't regenerate. His immortality simply isn't working. The one responsible steps forward, Scopper Gaben, face twisted with a fury that has nothing performative left in it. His son is among the captured kids, and he is done holding back. He follows up with a brutal slash straight across Summers' chest, the full weight of his rage behind it, and that's exactly where this particular confrontation ends, mid-collision, with Summers wounded in a way his own immortality can't immediately undo. The restrained Straw Hats watch all of this unfold in complete disbelief, because actually wounding a god's knight, someone supposedly immortal, isn't something they'd considered possible even a moment ago. Summers screams in pain, which is itself a strange sight for someone in his position. Gaban, sizing up his own performance with a kind of professional dissatisfaction, notes out loud that he's gotten rusty over the years, and immediately closes the distance to attack again. Summers throws up a barrier of thorns and retreats behind it, curious despite the pain about why Gaben's even on this island at all. Gaben brushes the question off, saying he doesn't feel like boring him with the answer. Nami, watching the fight from her restraints, fills the rest of the crew in on exactly who this is. She met him earlier at the castle, and even Luffy and Zoro, she explains, were completely outmatched in that encounter. She adds the detail that matters most right now. Gaben is Cohen's father. Robin, drawing on her own knowledge, identifies him properly as Scopper Gaben, and Jinbe confirms it, adding that he was considered Roger's left-hand man, mirroring the way another crewmate served as the right hand. Chopper watches with pure fascination, riveted by the fact that someone just managed to actually hurt a person who's supposed to be unkillable. Robin offers to help using her own Devil Fruit ability, but Jinbe warns her off immediately, pointing out that Summers can weaponize iron-forged thorns specifically, which would make for an extremely bad matchup against her powers. Summers escalates, blanketing the entire area in thorns with no safe ground left to stand on anywhere. Gabon moves through it anyway, faster and more precise than the trap can account for, and in one clean motion cuts Summers completely in half before sprinting off toward his son without a backward glance. Summers is left impaled on his own thorns, alive thanks to his immortality, but unable to regenerate from a wound this specific. Chopper, unable to hold back his curiosity even in the middle of a crisis, takes off after Gabon, desperate to understand exactly how he managed to hurt someone with that kind of durability. Back at the Walrus School, Anne stands with tears streaming down her face, having just set the building on fire under direct orders she never wanted to give. At the same moment, killing him sets the Owl Library ablaze himself. Watching both buildings burn fills everyone present with a grief that goes well beyond the physical loss. Gunko, confirming both fires are now burning, coldly instructs Ranja to step backward off her aero platform. Ranja, racked with guilt, blames herself out loud for the fires, insisting they're burning because she's still alive, and the other kidnapped children and nearby giants scramble to reassure her that isn't true. Gabon arrives at Gunko's position, furious, confronting her directly and telling her flatly that she has no right whatsoever to take away anyone's culture, their history, or their children. Gunko, unmoved, warns him that any further defiance just means she kills the kids instead. Despite the danger, every captured child starts cheering for Gabon, desperate hope that he can actually get them out of this. In his own head, Gabon begs Cohen silently not to say anything that reveals their relationship, worried it'll be used as leverage against them both. But Cohen, unable to stay quiet, calls out to him as his father anyway, and Gunko hears it instantly. Moving with speed that catches Gabon off guard, she dodges his incoming attack and immediately presses her arrow sword against Cohen's throat, threatening to kill him on the spot. Gabon calculates fast, thinking if he can move quickly enough, he might manage to put out both fires, save every child, and rescue the whole island in one continuous motion. He calls out to Cohen to hang on, promising just one more second to finish this, calling him a big, strong boy. Cohen, trusting his father completely, agrees to hold on. In that brief window, Gabon's mind flashes back to the day Cohen was born, remembering calling him the greatest gift he'd ever receive. Then reality snaps back. Gunko begins driving the tip of her sword into Cohen's throat. Gabon, using advanced observation haki to look into the immediate future, sees something that breaks him completely. There's no version of this where he reaches his son in time. No matter how fast he moves, Cohen dies. Faced with an impossible choice, Gabon drops both his axes and surrenders entirely. Gunko, calling him weak for giving up so easily, immediately riddles his body with arrows. He falls off the branch toward the underworld below, apologizing as he goes to his son, to all of Elbaf, for failing everyone. Cohen screams for him through tears, watching his father fall. Chopper doesn't hesitate. He dives off the branch after him without a plan, purely on instinct. That desperate scream from Cohen does something unexpected to Gunko. A memory surfaces, unbidden, tied to Brooke, from back when he was still alive, long before he became the skeleton musician sailing with the straw hats. The memory visibly shakes her. And on the other side of that same connection, Brooke's been quietly turning over how familiar Gunko looks this entire time. The rest of the crew trying to snap him back into focus on their actual situation instead. Gunko puts it together herself. The Soul King, the legendary musician everyone's heard of, is Brooke. It hits her hard enough that she starts moving toward him immediately, needing some kind of confrontation with whatever this connection actually means. She doesn't get there. Something stops her cold before she can close the distance. Imu, the mysterious supreme authority behind the entire world government, makes direct telepathic contact with all three knights simultaneously. The fury in that communication is immediate and total. They demand to know why recruiting the giants is taking this long, and then drop something that reframes the urgency completely. Mary Joyce itself is currently burning. The world government needs the giants' military strength right now, not eventually, to deal with a crisis at the actual seat of their power. Having run out of patience entirely, Imu takes matters into their own hands directly, remotely possessing Gunko's body from wherever they actually are. Her eyes shift the instant the possession takes hold, transforming to match Imu's own distinctive appearance. Speaking through her, Imu makes a declaration to the entire island. They intend to personally demonstrate exactly what a god's power actually looks like. The children's parents finally reach the scene, and the kids immediately call out for help. Cohen, still shaken from everything that just happened, warns the approaching adults that Gaben fell into the underworld and to watch out for Gunko specifically. One giant parent gets close enough to attempt a rescue, and Summers, still functioning despite his injuries, strikes first, stabbing them with his thorns before they can reach the children. Emu, possessing Gunko's body, finds the noise from the children and their parents irritating, and without any further warning, unleashes a massive blast of Conqueror's Haki. The force is staggering, instantly knocking every child unconscious and dropping several giants outright, though not all of them fall. Then the possessed body starts to change. Devil-like wings unfold from the back. A tail emerges. A trident materializes in hand. With these features now fully visible, Emu draws a magic circle in the air and summons cannons directly from it, blasting the remaining conscious giants clear off the branch. Emu turns their attention to Killingham next, asking if this is the actual limit of what his creatures can do. Killingham assures them it's nowhere close, explaining the nightmare portal he opened is still active, meaning fresh monsters keep manifesting from every fear still present on the island. He adds something worse. Since these creatures have no real concept of death, he can simply revive them indefinitely. There's no way to permanently end this threat through combat alone. Emu contacts Summers next, still recovering from being cut in half, and orders him directly to keep watch over the captured children, making sure none of them escape. Jinbei, observing Gunko's possessed body, notices something's fundamentally different about her now, some core shift in presence that has nothing to do with her usual demeanor. Robin, taking stock of the situation, asks where Luffy actually is, and the answer isn't reassuring. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and the entire new giant warrior crew are still down in the underworld, with no idea any of this is happening above them. That realization lands hard, because it means their strongest fighters simply aren't available right now. Robin decides to act on her own, using her Hana powers to work at freeing herself from her restraints, reasoning that attempting escape now beats waiting passively for a hope that isn't coming. Emu, meanwhile, considers the practical problem of how to actually use the captured children given Elbaf's current lack of any centralized ruler. Then they land on a solution. Dory and Bragi will become the new kings of Elbaf, puppet rulers operating entirely under Emu's control. Right on cue, Dory and Bragi arrive at the scene. Bragi, enraged at what he's watching happen to his homeland, grabs Emu's possessed body directly. Other giants charge in alongside him, but Emu remains completely unbothered by the attack. Calmly explaining exactly what's about to happen, Bragi will kill Jarul, then announce to the entire island that he and Dory are Elbaf's new kings. As Emu speaks, they summon a grimoire and from it a massive shotgun, using it to blow off Bragi's hand entirely just to free themselves from his grip. Strangely, no blood follows the wound. Something about this is already deeply unnatural. Emu addresses Bragi directly, offering him what they call the power of evil. A magic circle forms beneath his feet, glowing with dark energy, and Emu lays out the contract without ceremony. In exchange for a portion of his lifespan, Bragi gains immortality and overwhelming strength, but the cost is total. Bound to Emu through this pact, he loses all reason and logic entirely, obeying only their commands from that point forward. Emu adds one final chilling remark, that only demons represent the proper form for life to take. The transformation begins immediately. Bragi sinks into the ground through the circle and emerges from the other side changed completely. He's larger than any giant present, wings sprouting from his back to match Emu's own. And despite his wrist being entirely gone, he's somehow still able to use the severed hand regardless. The other giants are horrified, demanding their captain back, screaming for him to return to himself, but the demonic Bragi doesn't respond to any of it. He swats his own former crew away with brutal indifference, treating them as enemies now. Dory goes through the exact same process next. Both legendary captains of the giant warrior pirates have now been turned into demons under Emu's direct control, and they immediately order their own men to help kill Jarul. The loyal warriors refuse, despite the overwhelming power gap, unwilling to betray their country and everything it stands for regardless of the cost. It doesn't end there. Several more giants get pulled into magic circles and transformed the same way, one after another, and the giants who remain unchanged have no real choice left but to flee from their own former comrades. The whole scene collapses into chaos, demon giants chasing down the people they used to protect. With multiple demonic giants now under Emu's control and Killingham's creatures swarming everywhere, Emu surveys the results with something close to satisfaction, remarking that Elbaf's raw power is quite promising after all. But they clarify their actual intent. They won't destroy Elbaf outright. The country still has value to them. From this point forward, though, Elbaf answers to Imu directly. The Giants' independence, as it's existed until now, is over. Imu adds that they're curious just how useful the Giants will prove to be in the war that's coming, which lays out the endgame plainly: Elbaf's warriors, repurposed as a standing military force for the world government. The remaining Giants, watching Dory and Bragi's demonic forms bear down, beg Jarul to run, insisting there's no shame in retreating from something this far beyond anyone's control. Jarul refuses outright. A warrior never runs from a fight, he says, even facing certain death, even against odds this hopeless, and he holds his ground regardless. Kashi, one of the Giants who's been with the Straw Hats since their egghead days, pleads directly with the transformed captains not to kill him, pointing out that Jarul is the oldest living giant in the world, and a genuine hero. Surely that history means something. The demonic Bragi's answer twists that logic completely. It's precisely because Jarul's lived this long that he has to die now. Dory, equally transformed, announces that once Jarul falls, he and Bragi will take the throne themselves and usher in an era defined by war and cruelty, replacing everything peaceful the Giants have built with something far darker. The remaining Giants try to physically hold the transformed pair back, hoping to buy Jarul time, but the attempt backfires in the worst possible way. Anyone who gets too close during the struggle starts showing signs of the same demonic transformation spreading through simple proximity. Watching that chain reaction begin, the rest are forced to pull back entirely, since even trying to help now risks becoming exactly what they're fighting. Down in the underworld, none of this has reached Luffy's group yet, at least not directly. Loki's still working on Hadruden, needling him to beg for answers about their father, and Hadruden refuses on pure pride alone. That's when Luffy senses something. He announces with a certainty even he can't fully explain that Chopper's landed somewhere close by, his observation Haki picking up his crewmate's presence purely on instinct. Loki senses the same arrival. The group agrees they need to go find him and whoever fell with him, though Gerd and Goldberg stay behind to keep watch over the still-chained Loki, unwilling to leave him unattended even now. Loki tries to use the moment to push for his release, presumably arguing the situation demands it, but both Giants refuse regardless of what he says. Then Loki gets a transponder snail call from Mosa, the person he's been speaking to remotely all this time. Mosa tells him their conversations have to stop for a while, but wants Loki to know how much those talks have genuinely helped, thanking him sincerely for being there. The tone immediately puts Loki on edge, since it reads like someone bracing for something dangerous ahead. He asks directly if Mosa's in danger, and Mosa denies it before hanging up before he can press further, leaving Loki visibly unsettled about what's actually happening to his friend on the other end of that call. Gerd, having overheard the whole exchange, tells him gently that she's glad he found someone, that it must have been lonely down here all this time, and Loki, immediately defensive, snaps at her not to make anything of it. Hadruden and Luffy's group return shortly after with Chopper and an injured Gaben in tow, and Hadruden orders Gerd to get her medical supplies ready immediately to treat the wounds from Gunko's arrows. Loki, relieved both of them survived the fall, tells Gaben he's lucky Chopper was the one who caught him, since there's no better doctor available anywhere. Then comes the moment Luffy's told the truth about who Gaben actually is, a member of the legendary Roger Pirates, information that leaves him completely stunned. The Giants fill in more context, that Gaben and someone else were considered Roger's wings, with Gaben specifically serving as the left hand to match another crewmate's right, and third strongest member of the entire crew, behind Roger himself. A detail that finally clicks something into place for Zoro about exactly how outmatched they were at the castle earlier. Luffy connects another dot on his own. If Gaben sailed with Roger, he must know Shanks too. At that point, Gaben stirs awake, and the very first thing he does is correct the record. He considers himself second strongest of the Roger Pirates, not third. Pride fully intact, even freshly unconscious. Chopper fills everyone in on the full scope of what's happening above. Imu's possessed Gunko's body. The God's Knights are rampaging unchecked. Dory and Bragi have been turned into demons. The children are captive. The school and library are both burning. The entire nation is under direct attack. As he finishes, everyone in the group feels an overwhelming burst of Haki reach all the way down into the underworld. Imu's conqueror's Haki, pressing down even from this distance, with a weight unlike almost anything most of them have felt before. Gaben's face goes grave, understanding immediately what that magnitude of power actually means for what's waiting above. Hadruden takes charge immediately, ordering his crew back onto the lift to return to the Sun World as fast as physically possible. Their home needs them now. Loki, hearing this, is fully ready to join the counterattack himself, prepared to fight for people who, by every account, hate him. Then he starts laughing, not with humor exactly, more grim recognition. That level of power they just felt changes everything, he says. It means, one way or another, they're going to have to free him. Whether they trust him or not, the situation's gotten desperate enough that it stops being optional. The lift crew, everyone except Hajrudin and Gerd, starts preparing to head up immediately, the urgency of the situation above overriding everything else. Chopper asks to stay behind briefly to treat Gabon's wounds properly first, and Luffy agrees without hesitation, since having their actual doctor look after someone this important only makes sense. Gabon, before they head off, shares something crucial. The gods' knights aren't actually immortal, whatever appearances suggest, and the real trick to beating them comes down to how Luffy applies his own Conqueror's Haki specifically. He wants Luffy paying close attention to his technique going forward. Luffy thanks him, promising to save Koen and everyone else in danger, determination clear in every word. Loki, having listened to the entire exchange, thanks Gaben too, noting it helps him understand his own power better, which quietly confirms he possesses the same kind of Haki himself. Loki asks Hajrudin one more time to remove the sea stone cuffs. Hajrudin refuses again, the tension between them still fully unresolved. Gabon drops one more piece of information before they can move on. Someone else in Luffy's own crew can use Conqueror's Haki. Sanji immediately assumes it's him, already stepping forward expecting praise for a hidden talent nobody's mentioned before. It's actually Zoro. Zoro's genuinely stunned, having had no idea this was even true about himself. Loki, for his part, reveals he sensed it coming off Zoro this entire time, more surprised that Zoro himself never noticed. Gaben needles him for the obliviousness, telling him he needs to consciously control something like this if he's serious about supporting an emperor properly. Zoro apologizes, a little sheepish about missing something this significant in himself. Sanji, visibly disappointed it wasn't him, asks Gaben if he has it too, which only underlines how thoroughly overshadowed he feels in this particular moment. Loki, once again frustrated by the whole situation, can't believe Hajrudin would rather trust total outsiders to save Elbaf than accept help from him directly. It's a direct hit to his pride. Hajrudin stands firm anyway, telling him plainly he doesn't trust that Loki wouldn't turn around and join the world government the second he's free, especially given he's already betrayed the country once before, at least as far as everyone else understands it. Luffy, trying to defuse the standoff entirely, floats an idea nobody saw coming: invite Loki to join his own crew. His logic is simple enough. If Loki's a straw hat, Hajrudin has no real grounds to object, since Hajrudin himself already answers to Luffy as part of the Grand Fleet. Zoro and Sanji reject the idea instantly and in perfect unison, pointing out the obvious logistics. Loki's far too big to fit anywhere on the Thousand Sunny, and he'd probably eat even more than Luffy does, which is genuinely saying something. Luffy stays optimistic regardless, figuring it'll work itself out somehow, reasoning that Elbaf doesn't want Loki anyway, and he seems like he'd be fun to have around, which is about as far as his reasoning ever needs to go. Loki, for his own part, wants no part of serving under someone else's captaincy either, pride cutting both ways here. Hajrudin notices, quietly, that Luffy's read on people is usually accurate, but ultimately still refuses to let Loki anywhere near the crew. He's already condemned to death for his crimes. Freeing him into a pirate crew crosses a line even Hajrudin's not willing to cross. Before the group can head to the lift, Gaben steps in with real authority and orders Hajrudin to free Loki. The command stuns everyone present. Hajrudin demands to know why, listing Loki's crimes again as if they need repeating. Gaben answers with information that reframes the entire foundation of everything Elbaf believes about that day. 14 years ago, he and Shanks were both actually on the island when Harold was killed. Both of them sensed an abnormal Haki at the time, something that felt wrong, dangerous, entirely out of place, but neither of them saw what actually happened. They only felt that presence from a distance, never confirmed what it belonged to. That single admission is enough to make Hajrudin reconsider everything. He orders his crew to head up without him. He needs to hear the rest of this first. Luffy tells Zoro and Sanji to go on ahead too, choosing to stay behind for anything involving Shanks no matter how small. Once the others leave on the lift, Gaben tells Loki to lay out the entire story, everything that happened that day, no omissions. Hajrudin gives him exactly 3 minutes. No lies, no exaggeration, just what actually happened. Loki agrees to tell it, warning them first that it was a horrible day, one that clearly still haunts him even now, all these years later. The memory pulls back 14 years. Loki and Jarul had been summoned to Orist Castle by King Harald himself, and walking toward the throne room, Loki's already irritated, openly contemptuous about listening to anyone who serves the world government, adding, almost offhand, that the world government were the ones who killed Rox in the first place, which tells you exactly how he's always viewed that institution. Jarul warns him to keep his voice down inside the castle walls, but Loki keeps going regardless, arguing that Jarul's own laid-back attitude is precisely why Elbaf's raising a generation of children who'd rather have peace than fight. Jarul answers calmly that he has no problem with that at all. As long as the children under his watch are safe, that's worth more to him than the old warrior culture ever was. The two of them clearly see Elbaf's future in completely incompatible terms. As they reach the throne room, a sound stops them cold, wrong in a way that doesn't need explanation. Loki doesn't hesitate. He kicks the door down, needing to see immediately what's happening to his father, and what's waiting on the other side horrifies both of them completely. Harald is being stabbed repeatedly by his own royal guards, the very men sworn to protect him turning on their king in the middle of his own throne room. Total, absolute betrayal, playing out in real time in front of his own son. At the exact same moment, somewhere else on the island entirely, Gabon and Shanks are relaxing together in a bath Ripley had prepared for them, completely unaware anything's happening. The two of them are reminiscing about how long it's been since they had time like this together, and Shanks mentions that even with his plan to form a crew with Buggy and live a simpler, laid-back life, Elbaf still has more to teach him than he expected. There's wisdom here he hasn't fully absorbed yet. Gaben sees Shanks' path differently, calling him a child of fate, telling him not to get hung up on small deviations from whatever he originally planned, because destiny clearly has other ideas for him, ideas bigger than a quiet life with Buggy. Once they're both dressed, Gaben asks if Shanks knows anything about Harald specifically. Shanks reveals he actually met Harald in Mary Joyce itself, and the two got along well, though Shanks sensed even then there were subjects neither of them could touch in that particular setting. He'd hoped to finally have that fuller conversation here on Elbaf, before it became too late to have it at all. And in this exact scene, something small gets revealed that changes how you look at Shanks' entire design from this point forward. He used to have a tattoo on his left arm, the same arm the Lord of the Coast would eventually bite off, saving young Luffy back in the series' very first chapter, and that tattoo bears the symbol of the God's Knights. Back at Orist Castle, as the massacre of King Harald unfolds in real time, a mysterious figure moves quietly through the chaos and finds something Elbaf has kept locked away for reasons nobody's explained yet. The country's forbidden devil fruit, the one that grants immense power, the one the giants have guarded specifically because of what it can do. This figure's identity stays deliberately unrevealed. Whatever they do with that fruit is going to matter enormously later. One more flashback opens, pulling back even further than the assassination itself, meant to answer a question that's been sitting underneath this entire arc. How did Harald, of all people, become beloved enough by his own nation that his death still shapes everything 6 years later? Because by every account available, the giant warrior pirates weren't always the crew they are now. There was a time when they were considered the single most feared pirate crew in existence, and Harald is the reason that changed. That flashback, along with the full account of what actually happened to him and how the entire God Valley incident connects directly into Loki's real backstory, is where the story picks back up from here. Since that incident is still actively unfolding as of right now, and deserves its own complete breakdown once it wraps. Step back from the blow-by-blow for a second and look at what actually happened across this arc, because it's easy to lose the shape of it in the middle of dueling giants and children's nightmares made real. 3 separate stories collided on this island, and none of them were really about the fight everyone expected going in. The Straw Hat side of it was never really about defeating Road or clearing a diorama. It was about 6 people getting stripped of context entirely, dressed as dolls, and having to reconstruct not just where they were, but who was doing this to them and why. Which turned out to matter enormously once Road's motive, jealousy dressed up as loyalty, connected directly into the succession crisis eating Elbaf from the inside. The Harald and Loki thread was never really a simple hero and villain story either, even though every giant on the island has spent 6 years telling it that way. A father who tore out his own horns to reject his people's violent legacy. A son blamed for a murder that the timeline itself is quietly casting doubt on, Given that Gaben and Shanks both sensed a wrong, out-of-place presence they never actually confirmed belonged to Loki at all, and Hadruden caught directly between them, carrying a version of that same rejection through his own mixed blood. Discriminated against by the very culture his half-brother supposedly destroyed trying to protect. None of that resolves clean by the end of what's covered here, and it isn't supposed to. The God Valley flashback that's still unfolding right now is where that entire thread actually gets its answer. The invasion thread is the one that reframes everything else retroactively. Because it turns out the God's Knights weren't reacting to anything the Straw Hats did. They were already inside before the ship ever landed, already mapping who to threaten and how. And the reveal that Shamrock is Shanks' twin brother does something the Arc doesn't spell out directly but clearly wants you sitting with. It means the person who shaped Luffy's entire worldview as a child, who handed him a hat and a reason to go to sea, comes from the exact bloodline the world government considers untouchable royalty, and walked away from all of it without ever once making that inheritance part of the story he told a kid on a dock. That's not a footnote. That's the emotional foundation the entire back half of the series has been quietly built on, without anyone realizing it. And then there's Emu, who up to this point had mostly existed as an implication, a presence referenced more than shown. Watching them casually turn two of the most beloved, legendary characters in the giant race into demons, stripping away everything that made Dory and Bragi who they were with a spell that reads less like combat and more like paperwork, tells you more about the actual scale of the threat facing this world than any prior scene involving them has. Jarul refusing to run in the face of that isn't just a moment of warrior pride. It's the arc's clearest statement of what these characters are actually fighting to protect, and why giving in, even to save something as sacred as the library or the school, was never going to be enough to satisfy an enemy who doesn't actually want compliance. They want ownership. None of this wraps up here, because it can't. Loki's still chained, laughing at the certainty that he's about to be freed regardless of what anyone decides. Gaben's falling through the underworld with Chopper diving after him. Dory and Bragi are still demons. The children are still captive, and Ranja's still standing at the edge of a branch that nearly cost her everything for refusing to trade her friend's history for her own safety. Whatever happens next up there determines what kind of nation Elbaf actually becomes, assuming there's still a version of Elbaf left to decide anything once the smoke clears.